Why are there so many shows starring Muppets and dozens of movies too? They said they'd watch every one and they mean it. It's something that they've got to do. So now they've pledged you a lifelong commitment. The Muppets, Matthew and Sam.
Welcome to Kermitment, the podcast where two friends have vowed to watch all things Muppets. I'm Matthew Gatos.
And I'm Sam Schultz.
And this week we are stepping outside of our chronological journey through the works of Jim Henson and the Muppets to talk about the brand new Disney Plus documentary all about Jim Henson and his work with the Muppets. It's called Jim Henson Idea Man, and it's a brand new thing we watched, Sam.
Is it though? In a way, it's definitely not. In a way, it's the oldest thing we've watched in forever.
We did get to see a lot of our old friends again. We got to revisit a lot of the things we've watched, and it really does feel like a crash course cheat sheet. If you want to just like skip ahead, if you don't want to listen to anything we've talked about on this podcast so far, and you want to jump ahead and catch up to where we're at,
Yeah.
you can just watch this documentary.
Thanks, Ron.
Yeah, Ron saw our podcast and was like, "Oh God, 2-hour long episodes, and there's 150 of them."
I wonder if it took him less time. Oh God, I wonder if it took him less time to make this movie than we've spent making this podcast.
I think it absolutely has. I think
Man hours probably not though, with how many people there were working on it. But
yeah, man hours definitely not. But as far as like from announcement of this getting made to it coming out, that has happened within the time frame of this podcast.
Sure, but this isn't a full-time job, and I assume for some people, Idea Man was a full-time job.
It seems like something that you'd want to throw your best people at with their best work, and I think there's some impressive visuals in there that I have to assume someone was working on constantly.
Yeah.
Maybe even potentially over full time.
Well, okay. The industry's fucked, man, okay?
That's what I was getting at. But before we get into that, Sam, how did it feel to sort of step outside the Muppet Babies 1986 world a little bit and get to see both our old friends, but also some friends we haven't met yet?
At the end, I wrote a blessedly Muppet Baby free experience. They don't even show one little fraction of a second of these guys.
No, Muppet Babies doesn't exist in this documentary.
They've been scrubbed from the record. It felt good because I'm still such a fan of his older stuff. And even in this, it was like when they got, and this is a bad thing to say, but when they got to the Muppet Show, even I was like, take me back to Jimmy Dean. That's what that was the stuff I liked. And Sesame Street, there's like an interesting thing that I think maybe Frank says or somebody says was like Jim did his best work on Sesame Street because he could just step back and perform. And it's like, I don't know, that kind of comes across in the old Sesame Street that we watched, that it was like more alive than some of the other stuff he was doing and maybe stressing out more about. But we're just in such a weird part of Jim's life right now, and it's going to get even weirder. And we saw clips of Storyteller, which I'm so excited to watch because him going down those CGI stairs. So it's just like, what are you doing?
That's the Jim Henson hour.
Oh, sorry. Right. What is he in Storyteller?
I don't believe so. I think that's fully a fantasy world. That was the weird giant clips we saw and the weird big dragony looking beast
like a
thing.
Dragon or something like that.
Yeah, those are all Storyteller. The CGI stairs with the big lion puppet, that's all the Jim Henson hour.
Right. I'm excited to see both, but I'm excited to see the Jim Henson hour, to see him truly unleashed his strangeness.
Yeah, that's one of the things I'm definitely most excited for that we haven't seen yet from Jim Henson's lifetime.
But yeah, it felt good. It was definitely, like I said in an earlier episode, it was like, I know this. I already know all this stuff. Why are you showing me this again? But it's always great to see Harry the hipster.
Well, I feel like if we keep talking anymore right now, we're going to just start talking about the documentary. So we might as well skip ahead to that part. And I'll ask you, Sam, what do we watch this week?
We watched Jim Henson, Idea Man. Directed by Ron Howard, this documentary chronicles the life and work of Jim through the lens of his family, particularly his wife Jane, his constant struggle against being hemmed in creatively, and his uneasy relationship with time and the fleeting nature of the human life. Basically what we're doing here, but an hour and 45 minutes instead of potentially infinite. In the film, friends, family, and collaborators like Frank Oz, Dave Goles, and several of Jim's children talk through Jim's early life and career on local DC area television in the mid 50s, putting together Muppets Incorporated, his stint on Jimmy Dean in commercials, his breakthrough time working on Sesame Street, the ensuing attempts to reinvent himself, the creation of The Muppet Show, and then moving on from that to the darker Creature Shop films, later TV projects, and then his death in 1990. So his whole life. I don't know how to sum it up any more or less than that. Listen to every episode of our podcast.
Yeah, you could spend an hour and 45 minutes watching this documentary, or you could spend like 230 hours
Yeah,
listening to our podcast.
do your homework. We did our homework. Now you do yours.
But yeah, Sam, what are your overall thoughts on Jim Henson Idea Man?
I'm so bad. I feel like one of my biggest media blind spots is documentaries, and I'm so bad at knowing
Oh.
if a documentary is good or not. This
Mm.
one seemed fine. I really there's a lot of it that I really loved.
Yeah.
I think it had a lot of valuable Frank Oz stuff that was like great to see him and Dave. I wish Dave Goles had been in it a little bit more, but it was great to see them talking. There was some amazing footage of Jerry Jewell that was like,
Mm.
how did he interviewed for this movie after he died, it seemed like, because there was such good insights and like such a straightforward interview with him that I'm not really sure where that came from or if we'll watch that someday. But I thought that was really cool too. And then I loved, to a certain extent, I loved how much it focused on Jane. There's a really interesting part that I'll just say what it was right now because I don't know if we'll get into it, where Rachel, for new listeners, my wife was watching with me and she was like, "Oh, it's amazing how good Jim was at puppeteering right away." And then it was a Sam and Friends thing, and then they stood up at the end and it
Mm.
was Jane, and then it showed her like, "This is Kermit," and she was like doing all the squinches and stuff, and we were both like, what the fuck?" And then I was talking to her about like how she trained Frank and like she she really knew what she was doing with that Kermit. So I liked that. It got into some stuff eventually where I was like, you kind of like waffling in a weird way about their relationship, but I don't know. Overall, it was like fun to watch and it made me tear up, which I guess is probably the intent. And I feel like I would love to have watched it in an alternate reality where we didn't make this podcast. And I'd be like, wow, I did not know that. But it's really hard to be us and watch this and be like, we literally read a book that's almost exactly this documentary, which is kind of a strange part of it. But yeah, I can't step away objectively and look at it in that respect. And I'm so bad at knowing if documentaries are good or not that I honestly don't know. But at the end, I cried.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about with intent is important to think about, especially with documentaries, because you can watch documentaries that are clearly made with a goal in mind
Sure.
of we want to convince you that this person was great, or we want to convince you that this person was bad, or hey, I bet you didn't know this. And I feel like there's a mixture of a lot of those things in this.
Mm-hmm.
I will say overall, I did enjoy it. I did enjoy this documentary. I think a lot of what you just said though is gets into some of the things that I don't even know if I would go as far as to say I didn't like, but we've seen some documentaries through the years, like Henson's Place, of Muppets and Men, Inside the
Uh-huh.
Labyrinth, and they use a lot of clips from all of those in this.
Yeah.
I would say I still recommend people go watch those on their own if they want to see even more in depth, especially about the Muppet Show, because we get so little in this documentary. But I think this, overall is a great introduction to Jim Henson.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think if their intention is to make a feature length film documentary that gives you a good oversight crash course of Jim Henson, they nailed it.
Mm-hmm.
Do I think this feels like a definitive exploration of the life and work of Jim Henson? No, but I
No.
think you would need like a 6-part miniseries to
Maybe
really
even
get into
more
that.
than that. You'd need like base. How many parts was baseball? Like 15 parts? I don't know. You would need a lot of time.
I think you could get away with 6. I even,
Okay.
like, broke it down a little bit.
Oh, of
Uh,
course you did. Okay, sorry.
um, so I would give this 6 parts, and that's just,
Okay.
like, top of my head, I would say the first one, you've got Sam and Friends in the commercials era.
Mhm.
Second one, Sesame Street. Third one, Muppet Show in the movies.
Mhm.
Fourth one,
Where's
it could be
Jimmy?
all
Where's Jimmy?
Jimmy would fall into the Sam and Friends in commercials, I think. The pre-Sesame Street work would get its whole hour.
Uh-huh.
After the Muppet Show in the movies episode, I think you could do an entire episode about his relationships, his marriage, his friendships, get to know the
Yeah.
people who knew him, because I feel like it's an interesting choice that this movie only interviews people who have firsthand experience with Jim. And I feel like there's both good and bad things about that, because
Huh.
to me, like, you get some stories that I'm like, huh, I wonder how someone a little bit more removed from that scenario would think about that.
Like what?
For instance, they talk about sex and violence and the SNL Land of Gorge stuff,
Oh,
and no
yeah.
one has a nice thing to say about either of those.
Right, right.
They're all just like, it was garbage, no one liked it, it was trash, it didn't work, moving on. And
But
I'm
even if
like,
you had, like, Jerry Nelson, maybe he would have said, "I had some fun." You know?
right. And I think, like, I am sure there's footage out there of the people who have passed, like Jerry Nelson and others, who could maybe say something nice about those things. And I just thought it was interesting how there was a few things they really rushed through and
Yeah.
didn't say much about. The SNL thing got 1 minute of this documentary,
Mhm.
and it's all negative. And so they just sort of see it
Right.
as like this weird ass detour. Like, ugh, I can't believe we did that.
But
And
that
I'm
does
like,
miss out on
oh,
so much nuance of, like it was, like, a fascinating like, meta TV art piece by the end of it.
yeah. And they choose like a random bad clip from the very first Gorge episode. And I'm like, there is actually some good Gorge stuff you could have shown
Get a
off.
cute Scred thing. Like, they got really close when Chevy Chase was talking to Scred in the box being like, "Gosh, really a shame you guys got canceled." And that's when that stuff really was like, "Hey, this
Yeah.
this is actually pretty good."
Yeah, the Lily Tomlin stuff was very good.
Yeah, totally.
I just feel like some of their clip choices were really weird at certain points. There's a
Mm.
there's a moment where Heather Henson is just talking about Jim feeling boxed in and not too sure about what he's doing, and like in the middle of this, they just show a clip of Harry and Kermit talking about SK Bacon, and I'm
Oh.
like, they didn't even relate it back to his commercials or not liking that stuff. It's just like him talking about his workload, and then it's like this random
Mm.
clip that they were like, yeah, this is kind of cute. Let's put this here, and I'm like,
I thought
okay.
the intent with that was to be like, he's selling out and doesn't wanna be a sellout or something like that, but
I
maybe
guess
you're right.
so, but this is also the man who has an altar to money, we learn.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think money was not something he
Yeah.
balked at.
I think it's kind of
But yeah,
funny that they took a little bit of time to be like, "This moron wanted to start nightclubs." Uh, and then there was kind of like an interesting I guess they almost tied this together, and maybe they did in their heads, like, when he started Sesame Street and they were like, "You can make
mm,
as many experimental films as you want." That kind of, like, brought that, like, what
right.
itch he was trying to scratch, like, that satisfied that, and that, like,
Mhm.
connection made in my head. I'm not sure that that was something that they, like, realized, but it was like, he didn't wanna start a nightclub. He wanted to make a bunch of experimental films, and he couldn't think of any way that anyone would give him any money to do it, I guess.
Well, and I think it's Cheryl Henson who is like, we were all very happy he went that way.
Yeah, yeah. How old was she when that would have happened, though? There's a part where Brian is like, "I could tell my dad was losing his innocence," and he was, like, 15 or something when that that was happening, and I was like, "Really?"
I think it's more in hindsight of
I
like, if
suppose.
our dad had gone down the experimental film nightclub route and didn't do Sesame Street, we wouldn't be here today talking about this in a
That's
documentary.
true. That's true. Or he could be some kind of, like, Donald Trump type mogul or something,
Oh
like, he
God.
would be really nasty.
I need a bigger altar to money.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think this is a great introduction to Jim Henson. This is something that I would recommend,
Mhm.
my parents to watch, or like friends and family who, they've watched probably some of the Muppet movies. They've heard about the weird commercials with the violence, and that's kind of where their Muppet, knowledge ends. And
Mhm.
that's fine. That's, the average person. We are in this weird world where we know too much. So for us, it's not, this is not a documentary made for us. I think
No.
this to me, like, it doesn't delve as deep as the Brian J. Jones biography. It can't. It doesn't have as much time.
Mhm.
But I feel like I think the way to sum this up is it's like the Jim Henson Greatest Hits album. And
Yeah, sure.
in high school, I was a person who listened to The Cure's Greatest Hits album a lot.
Sometimes that's all you need, isn't it?
And that's what I'm getting at. Because that's sort of as deep as my knowledge of The Cure goes. I
Uh-huh.
know these like 6 or 7 songs, and I'm like, I like The Cure based on this selection of
Yeah.
greatest hits songs. And that's not necessarily like a bad thing, but I also know that like I could probably learn more about the nuances or the,
Oh, you could
the
go crazy.
changes
We can make a
in
podcast
their.
about that.
I mean, that seems bad. I don't want to do that. But like you could follow the journey of a band more if you listened to all of their albums.
Yeah.
And
Right.
you would see like, oh, they really made a weird misstep here or did this. And like obviously that's a bit closer to what we're doing. And I'm not suggesting anybody else do what we're doing.
Uh-huh.
But I think there's maybe more of the middle ground. And I think something like a 6-hour miniseries is that.
I do think it did a kind of a good job, even if it was uh a bit like not in the forefront. It did a good job of like showing that he was not perfect and that he really
Yeah.
did like not kind of in a way not know what he was doing for a lot of his career in a way that probably most people don't know what they're doing. But it's just like maybe he was lucky enough to have a career for his whole life, and a lot of the people who don't know what they're doing make a couple of good things and then they just disappear, and everybody's like, you did a great job on those two things, and they don't look at all the weird stuff that they did. But Jim just has it sandwiched so many other places.
Yeah. It's sort of like because he's done so many great things, the bad things all seem worth it, or
Mm-hmm.
the bad
They're like
behavior or
part of
the,
the
the
adventure or something. Yeah.
right. But, think about how many people out there have made as many missteps as this guy or have cheated on their wife in the same way and didn't have the success he had.
Didn't live in 1975, and that was yeah,
Yeah.
looked at
And
very
so,
differently.
right. And so, yeah, I think like it's one of those things where, again, because it worked out business wise and like fame wise, we can all look back on it as sort of a like, well, those things
Yeah.
had to happen to make him the man he became, sort of thing. But
Uh-huh.
at what expense? And I do enjoy the kids talking more openly and honestly about their parents' relationship.
Right.
I it was one of those things where I'm like, I feel like this could either be when you said it was like waffling in it a little bit, I was like, yeah, I think either the whole documentary needed to be more focused on Jim and Jane, or it needed to be less Jim and Jane. Like it was a weird middle ground where I feel like the real estate of this documentary and the pacing was sometimes a little weird in how
Mm-hmm.
much time they decided to spend on certain things.
Yeah, like the documentary could have been called like Jim and Jane or something,
The
and
Hensons,
yeah,
like,
right. Yeah, maybe even a documentary about Muppets Incorporated is more, and like the whole team is more interesting and fulfilling and like valuable than just focusing on Jim. Like they don't even say, do they even say like Jerry Nelson's name in this? Maybe they do
once.
very briefly. And they don't do they ever even mention Richard Hunt?
No, they so Jerry Nelson and Richard Hunt each get an on-screen credit when they're talking about like expanding the team.
Oh, okay.
Jerry Nelson gets named once by name when Frank is talking about the Count on Sesame Street. He says something about like
Mm-hmm.
the Count was made
Right.
specifically for Jerry Nelson. Richard Hunt's name is never said in this entire documentary, um, which I know this is a Jim Henson documentary, but as someone who is currently reading the Richard Hunt biography, I was like, all right, this is the point when Richard will show up. And then they just don't mention him at all.
I mean, they don't really mention Dave either, except for the fact that he's there. Like, I'm not sure
Right.
they
Yeah. I
ever
feel like if
really
Dave
say.
wasn't involved in this documentary, he may not have gotten mentioned.
Building off of your Jim and Jane thing, I did feel like this movie had a lot of different framing devices, and maybe they needed to just settle on one. Like, at first, it
Yeah.
seems like it's going to be framed by the limbo guy. Then it kind of seems like it's going to be framed by the like that stop motion, like putting puppets together thing. and then timepiece kind of seems like what they're going to build it on, and then even like Jim's red book is there for a few scenes, but they kind of stop doing that, but not really stop doing that, but also don't explain exactly what that is, which would have also been interesting to be like, he kept a list of every fucking thing he ever did his entire life.
They also film it in the cube, so you have that
Yeah, the cube.
idea, which is like not really explored other than when they mention the cube. Frank is like, it was about a man who was trapped, and it's like,
Yeah.
okay,
And
so are you relating that to Jim or no? And they just kind of
And then
move
they
on
even
from that.
fade the cube footage into the set. So it's like,
Yeah,
this is the cube. We didn't just mess up. And the
get it?
panels open and stuff. Like that was cool. I thought the panels opening and showing like different little props they don't do that very often, but the few
Mm.
times they do it, it's kind of like they could have just framed it around the cube or but I don't know. It just was a little scattered in that respect. And even like Orson Welles kind of becomes a
Oh
framing
God.
device. It's like,
Orson Welles, and then the like 1986 photo shoot that Jim is doing
yeah,
in his Steve Jobs
right.
sweater. I think it feels like something that somebody made him do. And like,
Yeah.
hey, we need you to do a photo shoot for this magazine. You don't get to wear a big bulky sweater that you normally enjoy. You're going to be a little bit more clean cut. And this photographer is going to ask you a lot of uncomfortable questions while he's taking your photo. Go.
Perfect. It's my favorite thing to do.
But yeah, it is the Orson Welles one. I think is the weirdest choice for me because one, it's an unaired pilot. Most
Uh-huh.
people have never seen that show,
Yeah.
and when we talked about it, I didn't like it at all. I don't remember your
It's
feelings on it.
fucking weird. Well, like it or dislike it, it's weird. And you can tell how weird it is just from these little clips, too.
Yeah, because what we talked about before was that the fact that it very much feels like they did the interview and then Orson Welles filmed
Yeah.
all of his lines separately later on to camera to make himself look smarter.
Uh-huh.
And it just comes across as really weird and not connected. And I can't believe they included the line, "So you've never seen a puppet." And it's like, I remember when we talked about that experience, about that line during our episode, and we're like, there's no way that thing is true.
That he
But
didn't
because
see
the way
a
they edit it,
puppet.
it makes it seem like it's true that Jim
Yeah.
Henson never even saw a puppet, which he does not say
Yeah.
in that Orson Welles episode. Orson just assumes that. And because it's edited together
Yeah.
later, you don't actually get Jim saying, "You're right, Orson. I've never seen a puppet." I hate it. I hate that.
He maybe said like I never really went and watched a puppet show, right? And
That's
then
what he does. He says something
yeah.
along the lines of like, "Oh, I was never really into puppets as a kid." And Orson's like,
Never
"So you
seen
never
a
saw a puppet?"
puppet. Sure. At that point you're too scared to disagree with him. So you're
They
locked in this
even
dark room. There's no studio audience. He's just pretending there's one. And it's really dark in there. You just got to get out of there any way you can.
they even included the weird line of the man next to him, a man who truly fits his name, Frank Oz.
And also,
And
puppets don't date back to the crib. They date back to the cave. So they really got the greatest hits of Orson Welles being fucking weird.
yeah, you don't need to watch the Orson Welles pilot because you got the gist of it right here. But it's again, I think it's a good point about the multiple framing devices where because maybe they didn't have enough footage of any of those things to really use it, or
Hmm.
none of those things fully encapsulated the point they were trying to make. They had to jump around between framing devices a lot. And I think getting into sort of the flow of this, the first sort of 15, 20 minutes of this is almost incomprehensible to anyone who isn't us, I think.
Okay. Okay.
I think they are copying that like Jim fast cut editing style and they're just
Oh, sure.
racing through Sam and Friends. He met Jane. He's going to college. He's doing this. He's
Hmm.
doing this. And it just doesn't let you breathe at all. And again, I enjoyed it. I knew what was going on. I knew the things they were referencing, but even I was like, "Oh, can we talk about that for a second? Because that I think would be more interesting if we stopped for a second and checked that
Yeah.
out."
Yeah. Like it was even weird that they mentioned his mom was a Christian Scientist. Like that was something that stuck out to me as like they don't come back around to that exactly or anything.
They do a little bit, and I understand why they did that. And I feel like there's a very pointed moment at the end when they're talking about his death.
Oh,
Because a
okay.
lot of people
Right.
have it in their heads that the reason Jim Henson died so early is because he was a Christian Scientist who didn't believe in going to the doctor. And so that's why he died from pneumonia. So they mentioned that early on, I think, as a seed to be like, yes, it's true. His mom was a Christian Scientist. But at the end, when they're talking about his death, I think it's Lisa specifically says, "My dad never talked about God. He was not a Christian Scientist."
Oh, I
Uh,
must have just missed that.
yeah, they talk about him being like into Buddhism and transcendental
Oh,
meditation
I
and a lot
remember
of
that.
other
Okay.
things, but they specify he was not a Christian Scientist. And
Huh.
we'll get
Okay.
to this a little bit more as we get to the end of the documentary, but I do think the discussions around his death are fascinating in the choices they made in this.
Okay.
But at the beginning, we do have a lot of that. We have the Limbo kicking it off, talking over the Idea Man short film.
Hmm.
The short film Idea Man, where the name of this documentary comes from, was a 3-minute short film by Jim that they used as part of a live performance on the Mike Douglas show in 1966, which we did watch. And I don't know if you can go watch anymore because the Mike Douglas episodes
Oh,
had been removed from YouTube last time I
right, right,
checked.
right.
What episode number do you think we got to Mike Douglas?
Oh, 15.
I think that was actually episode 3, Sam.
Are you fucking kidding me?
No, episode 15. We were already in 1973 to Julie on Sesame Street. Our third episode is Tales of Tinker D, Land of Tinker D, and The Muppets on TV in the 60s.
Oh God, why?
There's 31 videos on that playlist, and I think some of them have been removed. So we watched more than 30 clips for that episode.
Gee, Jesus, we were
We made
insane.
some mistakes early on in our pacing. Well, Frank Oz is the first interviewee in this. I know. I mentioned that I thought it would be more interesting if they had a couple people outside of the family and friends. Do you think that felt missed, or do you feel like this was the perfect group?
Maybe if they had maybe if Jim and Jane had like another friend couple or something like that, and they could be like, "I'll tell you the real shit that was going down." Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe because if I was talking about my mom and dad, I feel like I would simultaneously make them sound worse than they were and also try
Mm.
to protect them. And I don't know, kids just have like a weird point of view on stuff. And no offense to any of the Henson children, but that is like a weird position to be in, to talk about your parents' relationship that you probably really didn't know everything about. Like they probably did take some secrets to their graves, but also maybe they did, like Jane maybe did have a friend who she talked to. You don't want to like get muckrakey, but it is like, yeah, maybe they're just like people who are too close to things in some degree.
Yeah, and I also think it's interesting at the beginning. They get into his family, like his mom, his dad, and his brother,
Hmm.
but they also. I'm kind of surprised at how little we learn about his family.
Hmm.
Like they each sort of get like one line about like his mom was a Christian Scientist, his dad converted to Christian Scientist, and he had a brother who died.
Yeah, I guess especially his dad gets kind of the short shrift in all of that.
Yeah, I just feel like it's interesting when you're trying to do this comprehensive life documentary that you spend like so little time talking about his relationship with his family members. Like by the time they're talking about him and his brother being like best friends, it's when
Hmm.
his brother is dying. Like
Yeah,
we don't really set up anything about them as kids that much.
right. Or even
So by
a lot of things will go over like his life down south and how that inspired Kermit in some
yeah.
way, and not so much. His mom was a Christian Scientist and she had a coat that he cut up. And that's all you need to know about her.
Yeah, I guess, and I understand the point of this documentary is a Jim Henson documentary, but when we are like only learning about these people in their relation to Jim
Mm-hmm.
and like how, in one sentence, how this one thing about them maybe have inspired something in him. I do think I just wanted like even just a couple sentences more about some of them to learn a little bit more about them.
Yeah, but I think that's just because you know too much, right?
Probably. Yeah. Like I know Brian J. Jones's book opens up, I think, talking about his grandparents and where they moved from and all this stuff. So
That's true. He did have a really close relationship with his grandma, right?
I believe so.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I don't know. It's just interesting the way they talk about Jim's relationships in general throughout
Mm-hmm.
this. And uh, I feel like I'm no clearer on some questions I had going into this. Like one of my questions, if we ever have the privilege of having Frank Oz on this podcast, I just honestly want to know about their friendship. How close were they? Did they hang out in their free time? What did they
We
actually? do, because I feel like we don't see examples of that a lot, and I feel like we don't learn much more about that in this conversation either.
I feel like we've gotten the impression that they had kind of a rocky relationship. And he
Mm,
does talk about like maybe at first we did have a rocky relationship because I was just putting too much. I was trying to make him my dad,
right.
and then talks a little bit more about when he stopped doing that and they became closer. But yeah, it does. I would like to know that too. I assume that they were just coworkers probably and didn't have Frank over to dinner very often or anything like that. But who knows?
Yeah, I feel like we read stories all the time about he went on a cruise with Richard Hunt and Bernie Brillstein and all these other people,
Yeah,
like hanging out on their vacation time.
that's true. And not a
And I
Frank.
feel like Frank's name is not in those stories very often.
Yeah, but I also think we've also read stuff that Frank was like way younger, so like a swinging single when Jim was having all his kids, and then they just
True.
like were indifferent. And then I guess probably off directing movies when Jim was also off directing his own movies. There's some great footage of the Dark Crystal, which we've maybe seen before, but where you can see like like The Simpsons, where it's like you can see the exact moment his heart shattered into pieces. It's
That is
like
a
you
clip I
could
don't
see.
believe we have seen before. I think the one you're talking about is and I don't know who would have been doing this, but there's a couple times where we get some like home movie footage and somebody is narrating like he is
I thought it was
'cause
Brian maybe, but
so I think so, but at one point he says, "I'm sharing this with my family," which is a weird thing to
uh-huh.
say if you're recording your dad. Maybe it's Brian, maybe it's not. But there's a moment where they're filming this home movie footage on the set of Dark Crystal, and Jim takes the microphone to Frank and says, "Mr. Oz, how do you think the picture's going?" And Frank stares blankly at the home movie camera and says nothing.
That feels very real based on the behind the scenes footage we have seen where he's just kind of stalking behind Jim, clearly deeply uncomfortable with how everything is going.
I was kind of hoping we get a story similar to what we've heard, where Frank has talked about Dark Crystal, where he said it was all in Jim's head. He knew everything, and I
Yeah.
was just like, "What the fuck is going on?" We didn't get a single swear word from Frank. Come on, Disney, let him loose.
Yeah, let him swear. He needs to. He'll hurt himself.
He's gonna explode. We do get to see the actual Jim's Red Book that we reference so often on this podcast.
Hmm.
And they like Sam said earlier, they reference it a couple times. They show it off, but it is not used as much as they probably could have used it because
Yeah.
literally everything is written down in there.
I mean, yeah, like I said, it would have been like it's an interesting fact that he kept
Yeah,
such an extensive journal. So I guess I don't know how you do this without a narrator, but somebody saying like he had this freaking journal. He wrote down when he met his wife in it.
you're
I
right.
guess he went back and wrote stuff down, or what do you? I don't know. Who knows?
Great question.
I don't write every single person I meet in my life like the day I meet them. And his one of his entries says met Jane. So who
Yeah.
knows? If also that day he said met Tim, met Brad, met
He just wrote
John
down every person in his puppet
in his
class.
class. Yeah.
Well, that's about the time when they start talking about how important Jane was, and they start to get into
Hmm.
their relationship and how they met in the puppetry class in college, which I do think is one of the most important things this documentary does,
Yeah.
uh, like sharing how important Jane was to the story of the Muppets.
Hmm. Yeah, like I think her through line in this was it's stupid to say that it was like I don't know, it was nice of them to do that. Like she just seeing that one piece of footage I already talked about was like she is so important and he just
Hmm.
like didn't
Yeah.
notice how important she was, which sucks. But this documentary doesn't like sugarcoat that really.
There is a nice quote from him around that part where you hear him saying to somebody, they don't show
That's
who's
true.
interviewing him, where he says something along the lines of like, in the early days, it was mostly my wife who was responsible for helping me puppeteer and do these. So
Hmm.
he's giving her credit at some point.
Yeah.
Um,
I
but
wrote
I
that
do
down. Yeah.
think they had a fascinating relationship, and I think it's interesting to hear firsthand knowledge of that from her, and
Hmm.
not as much from him. But when they're meeting, she says something like, "Falling in love is sort of a funny way of putting it because we were
Hmm.
just sort of always together." So it's not like they were, love at first sight. They ran away and were like, "We must get married." All this stuff. Like
Yeah.
they started hanging out. They were making some puppet shows together. They were dating other people. Jim goes off to Europe, and he comes back and he's like, "We are going to be puppeteers and we're going to get married."
And we're gonna get married. What
And like
happened
a
to
year
him?
later, they had a baby.
Yeah.
But yeah, then they dive into where Kermit came from. We get sort of a quick bio on Kermit, and get to see some things in color that we've previously only seen in black
Oh
and
yeah.
white.
Some Sam and Friends era Kermit, right?
And there's a clip from the Tales of Tinker D, which is
Oh,
like high res film scan and
right.
color. And I just want to see that now.
So that I think, I don't know if I'm right about this, but in the trailer for this, it looks like the trailer for this, I think they upscaled some of the stuff that isn't upscaled in this documentary. Like that interview
That,
footage, I'm pretty sure the interview footage where he's talking to those British guys, those three British guys, I think in the trailer that is upscaled. But anyway, that makes me think that this footage must exist in this beautiful film scanned form somewhere.
yeah, because you see a lot of this older stuff that was actual film seems to have been scanned to
Yeah.
actual like 4K quality,
Like
whereas a lot of
Even the Wizard of Id stuff I think shows up a little bit. Yeah.
yeah, and yet the film stuff from the 70s and 80s you can tell is not upscaled.
Just
It looks
videotaped.
bad,
Yeah.
and that just tells me, oh, there isn't a better looking version of that.
Right.
Like that, like I don't think Disney would have been like, it's good enough. Like if they're spending money to 4K scan Wizard of Id or Tinker D,
Yeah.
they'll try to figure out how to get the best like
Yeah.
quality copy of something else.
Right. But yeah, I mean, you can really see all the stitching on Kermit in that. There's like a just like a character shot of him. That is pretty
Hmm.
amazing. I didn't even think about that when it was happening.
Yeah, I know. I've seen still images of. There's like a famous image of Kermit with his little like lute for Tales of Tinker D
Mm-hmm.
that is in color, so you can kind of see the colors of it. But like I've never seen any color footage from
Yeah.
that.
I guess that's why I just knew in my head that he was like wearing an orange coat or whatever. But
Right.
yeah.
But speaking of the Europe trip for Jim, they do show off his notebook and show a bunch of his sketches of his time around Paris, and
Mm-hmm.
it, that's another thing where it's like I understand them not spending too much time, but they do just kind of like rush through his trip to Europe, and he's like, I met a bunch of puppeteers there, and I came back and I was like, I'm sure I want to be
Yeah.
a puppeteer.
And I guess that kind of does like later in his life, that does lead directly to like the importance that he felt in protecting like the legacy of puppeteering and shining a spotlight on
Right.
people that he probably thought, this is speculation, but we're doing more important work than he was or something, like the true
Yeah.
masters.
And Frank says something along those lines that he realized it's an art form while on that
Yeah.
trip. But then, yeah, they dive right into the decision to get married, and they have Lisa. And then it's time for the famous August 1961 Puppeteers of America Festival.
Is this footage from the actual festival?
It looks like it, which is
That's
super
cool.
cool.
Yeah.
I was kind of hoping to see, just like Don Celine walks by in the background or something.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if they were just able to track down somebody who had footage from this event who wasn't related to, didn't know Henson or anything.
It looks like there's summer camp. Like that is not how I pictured this event in my head. I pictured them being in like the Anaheim Convention Center or something. But it looks
Right,
like
like a hotel
fun.
ballroom.
Yeah. They're like out in like an open air theater. I think Kukla, Fran, and Ollie, it seemed like they were. But Disney just has to let us come sit in the basement and watch these videos. We won't bother anybody. We won't do anything bad. Just let us sit in the basement and watch this stuff. That's all we want to do. We got to see if
Please.
Jim is in the audience and Frank's in the audience, and we're like, this is 15 minutes before they met. Jim's about to cross the room. Say, who's this strange bald man?
You don't think if that moment existed, they wouldn't have used it in the documentary?
Who knows? But they wouldn't have the
Hmm.
keen eye that we do.
Also, Frank wasn't quite bald yet. He was 17.
He was working on it, probably, though.
This is when, this is one of the puppetry festivals where Jim meets his future work partners. And this is the one where he met Frank Oz and Jerry Jewell.
Mhm.
Lisa describes Frank as the mischievous son of a very serious puppeteer.
I feel like they took some extra pains to introduce us to Frank, and I really liked that. Like, it painted like a really nice picture of Frank. You kind of got like a really good idea of him in this documentary.
Yeah, I think we learn more about his parents than we do about Jim's.
That's true. Maybe his parents were just more interesting than Jim's parents.
I mean, yeah, I think fleeing Europe and then being a puppet builder and a puppet costumer
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
is pretty interesting.
Yeah. I also thought it
S-
was fun when he goes to Europe and he comes back and he's like, they actually get money to make puppet shows in Europe. It's like,
yeah, they get
that's what
funding.
I've
What
been
the hell?
saying. Yeah.
But I do think it's also interesting to add that layer in about Frank, where because his parents took puppetry so seriously, I think it's Lisa or Cheryl says, so Frank never took puppetry seriously.
Yeah. He just accidentally was one of the best puppeteers of all time.
Yeah. He hates that he's perfect at it. He's like,
Yeah.
God damn it. I'm so good at this Cookie
Why
Monster
can't I
thing.
stop? Yeah.
Ah!
He hates Bert, one of the most perfect characters ever conceived of by the human mind, and he hates him.
I just picture now, like Frank Oz now sitting at home, and occasionally he just has a puppet that he picks up. He's like, gotta use these muscles that I don't use anymore just because I'm called to it. I have to puppeteer at least once a year.
He's sitting in his big chair like the Green Goblin and Spider-Man, and like Cookie Monster's just like draped over the side and being like, "Put me on." Not again. I won't do it again. His maid walks in and there's cookies everywhere, and she's like, "Not again, sir. Not again." He's completely nude.
Well, now he's never coming on the podcast, Sam. You see what you did?
No,
You
he'll
took it
like
too
it.
far.
We gotta bait him. Prove it didn't happen, Frank.
Yeah, tell us you don't puppeteer Cookie Monster in the nude on weekends.
That's why we don't get a lot of behind the scenes footage from this stuff. Is that none of them
It would
had
just be all blurred out.
none of them had pants on.
Well, this is where they talk about Jerry Jewell joining up because Frank was too young, which
Mhm.
we've heard that story before about like Jerry Jewell basically saying that if Frank had been a little bit older, he wouldn't have gotten the job.
No, that's not true. Jerry's
I
invaluable.
yes. They also talk about Don Celine joining the team, and Frank talks about Don Celine having gerbils running all around his
Yeah,
warehouse,
what the
his
fuck was
workshop.
that? Have we heard that before? That does sound
Uh,
familiar.
yeah. So we had talked about Don Celine had set up like gerbil tubes around the top of the
Oh,
workshop
yes.
to
Right,
like let
right.
gerbils just always sort of run around, but occasionally they would get out and just be in the workshop.
As we see literally in footage.
There is nice footage of gerbils just running around the puppet workshop.
It does look like there's a massive mouse infestation, though, because they just look like mice running around. And they just describe Don as like a quiet, weird guy, and then show like the weirdest footage they could of him looking weird. And that's about all he gets.
Yeah, they touch on his death later on. They're talking a bit later on about how Jim's perception of time and how he felt time was running out.
Right.
And Frank talks a bit about Jim's views on death in
Oh,
relation to
yeah.
Don
Right.
Celine. And Frank's like, I was in the workshop crying. And Jim's just like, well, he's on another plane.
It's all right. He's on another plane. Have we also learned that Rolf's head was half a basketball? Did we know that already?
That felt new.
To
But
me as well.
again, there's clips in this that I'm like, I don't think we've seen that. And Devin was like, no, I remember you watching that. And I was like, oh, okay.
Oh,
If you say
okay.
so. I don't remember anything anymore.
We've been
We've
at it a
watched so
long
many
time.
things. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of this is probably in Brian J. Jones's book too. I would
Yeah.
guess he knew Rolf's head was half a basketball, but to me, that was amazing.
Especially because that's one of the moments they choose to show through like the stop motion animation of a basketball just being cut in
Yes.
half. And as they're like, Don took a basketball and cut it in half, I was like, oh, I know where this is going because that looks like a Rolf head.
Who else's head could it possibly be? Yeah, I love all the high def footage of extremely janky looking puppets. So it's great just seeing
Yeah.
like how bad Kermit looked and kind of how bad Rolf looked. Even though Rolf is perfect, he still was like, this is what Jimmy Dean was looking at. This weird safety pin together weirdo.
Well, this is the part where they introduce some Jimmy Dean. We get a pretty short, unfortunately short Jimmy Dean section.
Yeah, I was
in
disappointed by that.
this. This was one of those things I know we had talked about previously as we were looking forward to this documentary. We were
Yeah.
hoping we would see some behind the scenes or at least hear some stories from Frank or somebody about the Jimmy Dean show work. And we
Yeah.
got nothing other than they mentioned Rolf became a big star
Right.
and they show a few clips that are really good clips.
Mhm.
But much like the Saturday Night Live thing, as they're talking about introducing it, the next thing they do is show the very last thing they did.
Yeah, which
Like,
is their
so they're, I
reunion on on
think it
whoever
was Ed
that old.
Sullivan.
Yeah, Ed Sullivan. Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
But like as soon as it was like showing one clip, Frank is talking a little bit about Jimmy Dean, and they
Yeah,
showed that clip. I'm like, oh, they're done apparently because
that's
they jumped to the end of the story of Jimmy Dean and Rolf.
yeah,
And it's the same with the Chevy Chase clip for SNL where
right.
they're introducing you to the Land of Gorch. I don't even think they say the words Land of
I don't think
Gorch.
they do either. Yeah.
But they're showing it off, and then the next thing you see is Chevy Chase saying, it's a shame you guys got canceled. It's like, oh, okay,
Yeah,
I guess we're done here.
yeah. I wish I hadn't glossed over that so much, especially because I think if you asked, this is also speculation. If you asked some of those guys like what the good old times were, they might
Yeah.
say that Jimmy Dean was the good old times because that was just like the most raw form of what they would go on to do.
Well, I think something you get a sense of in this that I do enjoy, and I think they could have, it feels like it would have been relevant to the Jimmy Dean conversation,
Yeah.
is there are those moments where you feel like the glimmer of Jim succeeding in the way he was dreaming of succeeding and
Yeah.
being like, ooh, let's run with this. We can keep
Right.
doing this.
Right.
And I'm imagining, you know, you're getting hired to do all these commercials. You make a dog puppet for a dog food commercial, and you're like, yeah, whatever, it's work. And
Mm-hmm.
then suddenly you're a national star with like a daily TV
Right.
show, everything. And I can't imagine that for Jim, that wasn't the biggest thing. Like he probably thought he had peaked at that point.
Yeah. And then you're making me think that like the way this documentary is structured, it's like it should have been talking to somebody who has no idea who Jim Henson is. But the way it's structured is like, he's a big star because I feel like they never even make it feel maybe in some respects like he succeeded or like, I don't know. I don't get the
Mm,
impression. Maybe Sesame Street is the part where it's like this was the most fulfilling thing he ever did, and this is like,
yeah.
but and maybe this is how his life just was. I don't know, but it does feel like he's always like, this isn't quite right. This isn't quite right. This isn't quite right. And the documentary kind of doubles down on that a little bit by glossing over some of this stuff so much that it's like, I don't know. I don't quite know how to describe what I'm feeling, but it is
Hmm.
just like he was always chasing something and never reached his potential. And maybe a part of that is also just like the Muppet Show stuff they do cover so quickly that they don't talk about like this dude had a yacht and a million cars and
Yeah, there's a brief section later on where they talk about his fame and how that affected his relationship with his
mm-hmm.
kid and with Jane. But yeah, it doesn't feel, I don't know, structure wise, I feel like you could have made that feel inevitable a bit
Yeah.
more. Like you could have
Uh-huh.
made it seem like, oh, the seeds were there, or oh, this happened early on, but they worked through it, or this happened. Like, why was that the tipping point? It just makes it seem like fame went to his head
Mm-hmm.
instantly and was like, aha, screw all you. I don't need you. I got a
Yeah.
cool car now. When
When
it's like
he
in
really
reality,
he'd had a cool car since he was like 16.
right. He bought like a Rolls Royce or something when he was like 18 with his first Salmon
Yeah.
Friends money. So it's
Right.
like this dude's had money for a while. He's liked fancy cars for a while. It was not
Yeah.
suddenly post Muppet movie that he was like, I'm rich and famous.
It was like trying to say he accidentally became rich and famous and that made his life bad. But really,
Mm.
he wanted nothing more in life than to be rich and famous.
I do think that throughout this, I enjoy that they don't use a narrator and they use a lot of
Yeah,
archival footage and interviews.
I like that too.
They make good use of the Muppets on Puppets. Is one that I think
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad they showed off the part where they show behind the scenes of how
Yeah,
they made the fairy tale story with Rolf, because I think that's the kind of stuff that we've really enjoyed seeing when we get to see it, and that's the
yeah,
thing that the average consumer of Muppets doesn't get to see that often. They have a shot from Jim. It seems like he's giving a lecture or something. I'm not exactly sure what that clip is from that they use throughout, where he's talking on stage to a crowd. It seems like it's later in life, so I'm sure we'll come across it at some point. But he's talking about the commercials and says it was before we even started talking about violence on television, or maybe they were talking about it, but I didn't hear it.
over the montage of characters getting their heads blown off and stuff.
Yeah, they show a lot of just like the most gruesome parts. They don't
Uh-huh.
show Wontkins catching on fire, I noticed. They
Oh,
don't
yeah.
show them just setting him
Right.
on fire, but they do show a lot of the gunplay.
Yeah. And they don't let the LaChoy dragon really stretch his legs either and show his full destructive capabilities.
But, as much as we don't hear the words Richard Hunt or Muppet Babies in this,
We
we do hear the
do.
words LaChoy Dragon in this documentary, thanks to Carol
Absolutely
Spinney.
free of context, basically. Like, the what?
But Frank talks a bit about the necessity of the commercial work to fund the growth of the
Yeah.
creative team and to hire more
Right.
people. Um, this is when Frank brings up the altar to money that Jim created and hung on the wall as a reminder of like, well, we have to pay attention to that. Don't
Yeah.
forget that money is important, everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, it did kind of like maybe a part of this also sort of undercut like how savvy a businessman he was, which is like a big component of his success was like
Mm.
he wasn't actually that shy. It seemed like about being a little craven and making some money.
Yeah, I mean, like one of the interesting parts of the Frank Oz story of him getting hired that isn't covered in this, but is in the book, is that when Frank first got hired, he worked there for like a minute and then he got drafted into the army.
Oh,
And
right.
so
Yeah.
Frank was going to be joining the army. And so they called up Jerry Nelson to hire him because they were like, hey, we need somebody to help out with Rolf on Jimmy Dean. So, Jerry, you got the job. And then Jerry starts working there. And then Frank reports for his physical. He shows up, he fails his physical. And
You
so
got
he
puppet
walks back
elbows,
in.
son. You got to get out of here.
Maybe they're like, you know what? The work you do is too important to this country here on land.
America
So
needs Rolf.
America needs Ralph's right hand. But there's a story of like Frank walked back into the Muppet like workshop and Jerry Nelson just saw him and was like, ah, shit.
Oh, shoot.
Like
Yeah.
now I don't have a
Right.
job. And that's pretty much what happened for a while because Jim was like, yeah, Jerry, we can't afford to pay both of you. And Frank was here first. So Frank gets a job. And then it was a few
Oh.
years before Jerry was brought back in where they had the money.
I did. There was a moment in this that I thought was like the best, most actionable advice for being a human being, and it was when Frank was talking about doing the commercials, and he said even when Jim had to do something he didn't want to do, he always made it fun, which I feel like is the only way to exist as a human being and have to have a job and stuff like that.
Well, and also the experimental film part is like right after this. And
Mm-hmm.
that's when Frank mentions that they specifically would shoot commercials throughout the week to raise the money to be able to afford to shoot Timepiece on the weekends.
Yeah.
And so it took them like a year to film Timepiece because they just had to keep making like doing their day jobs. And then Timepiece was the overtime work. That's also about the time in the documentary when they touch on the death of his brother Paul and how that made him feel like life was short and time was running out. Another thing that I actually thought would be more the theme of the documentary was the
Mm-hmm.
time aspect, and they do come back to it a few times, but not as much as I think expected based on the trailer. I think really leaned on that. They show off a good chunk of Youth 68 that we haven't seen before. This documentary that Jim made, I think for NBC in
That
1969,
sounds right. Yeah.
that was reflecting back on, protests and politics and just everything that you don't normally hear Jim Henson talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the most interesting part of that is there's just a clip of Jim Henson who like had edited himself jump cutty style, talking about how people get edited into these things. And so you can't really believe them because you never know what they actually said because they're so heavily edited.
Yeah, that was interesting. Why I was like, why did they include that? Seems
Mm.
very pointed in a way that I don't quite understand.
But that's also Frank mentions he makes great goes makes a big point about Jim wasn't into drugs, but
Yeah, right.
he did some weird shit around this time.
Yeah,
That's when he mentions the cube, and when he brings up the Cyclia, the discotheque
I
nightclub
couldn't
with all the
believe.
projectors.
Yeah, I couldn't believe they mentioned this.
It's too good not to. It's such a
I guess
weird
so.
what if. But the next section of this documentary it devotes a good 12 minutes to Sesame Street, which I didn't mean at the sound like I was saying 12 minutes was bad. I think that's actually a good amount of time.
Yeah,
It's more in relation to how little time they spend on other things in this documentary.
yeah,
That was kind of shocking.
yeah. And Sesame Street's an important part of his life, but Disney doesn't own it, and it's not really in the trailers, so I kind of wasn't expecting them to get into it as much. But I guess you kind of have to get into it. It's what pulled him back into liking puppets, basically. It feels like so.
Well, and they use a John Stone interview that I think is a really good one to use because it sums up a lot of what you learn in documentaries like Street Gang and I Am Big Bird, which I
Hmm.
recommend both those documentaries if you want to learn any more about Sesame Street than you do in this. But I think the John Stone interview does a lot to just explain the beginnings, explain Joan Gans Cooney's role, explain bringing
Hmm.
Jim in. Like, they do a good job of giving you a quick rundown of Sesame Street's beginnings.
Hmm. And they talk about adding puppets to the street scenes, and they show footage from the bad first episode of Sesame Street with the
Right.
original Gordon, and I think it is at the end when he's looking for the turtle that has escaped because he's like wandering slowly backstage. It's just like you don't even know how weird this was. People watching at home,
And we, of course, see the ABCDEF Cookie Monster bit,
you
which
gotta show
is
that in
necessary.
every single documentary or anytime anyone brings up Jim. That's what you have to see.
Jim does get, I think, a little too much credit for Big Bird in this,
Yeah.
which we've heard in multiple places before. I think Henson's Place did this too, where they were like, wow, Jim made Big Bird pretty much. That's all
Uh
you need to
huh.
know. Moving on. And they don't mention Kermit Love or Don Saline or any of the other people who worked on Big Bird to bring
No.
it to life.
An alternate dimension with a Frank Oz Big Bird would be quite a place, though. I don't think he would have kept doing it for very long, I bet.
No. Big Bird would not be the mainstay on Sesame Street the same
Yeah.
way he is today.
Yeah.
I don't think.
Yeah.
Because, Carol Spinney shows up briefly in this to mention that Big Bird was offered to Frank, but because Frank didn't enjoy his time as the LaCroix Dragon, he did not want to do another full body Muppet.
Mm-hmm. And this is when
And
they
that's the
really get into Frank and Jim's relationship in a way that I thought was interesting, and like using Bert and Ernie to like describe these two men and how they got along with each other. And I just loved hearing Frank talk about like Bert sucked, and I had to make him fun for myself.
it's like Jim got to have all the fun, and I got to be the stodgy, boring guy. So I had to figure out how to make that fun for myself.
Yeah.
But this is the point where Jerry Nelson gets his only mention in the doc when they're
Yeah.
saying about the count was made for Jerry Nelson.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I think is a little odd, and I don't know necessarily where they would have put it in this documentary, which is why I'm bringing it up here because I also don't know the right point to mention it in this
Mm-hmm.
conversation. They never reference John Henson passing away. They talk so much about him having 5 kids. They talk about what each of the kids was into and what part they had in the work. But I don't know. To me, if I'm watching this documentary knowing nothing about their lives, you're interviewing 4 of the 5 children you keep talking about in this documentary. You hear from these 4 kids over and over throughout the documentary. And there's like a question, I think, of where is John?
Oh.
And obviously he died much, much later after Jim did. So it doesn't naturally flow with the story. But when they're doing like the postscripts at the end saying what's happened with the kids and what's happened
Oh.
with the
Yeah.
Muppets and all that stuff, it felt a little weird to me that there's not a mention
They
of
don't even mention
John
it. That
Henson
is
passed
very
away in
strange.
2014.
Do they mention him at, oh yeah, they do. They mention him playing Sweetums at some point, right?
Yeah, he was a Sweetums for like 10 years. He was
Right.
the Coca-Cola bear for a
Oh
while.
yes, okay.
And he was really involved
Mm-hmm.
in the Henson universe. And I think it's really nice that they talk about him as much as they do. But I think if you're watching this, not knowing anything else beyond what you're learning in this documentary, you're probably going to come away with this being like, well, where was the other kid? So again, not sure how they should have worked it in or whatever, but
I do think the postscript would have been a, yeah, that's an obvious place to put a mention of him. It does seem odd that they didn't do that.
well, yeah, because that's the point too, where you could also be like, Lisa is now the CEO of the Jim Henson Company, and
Right.
Cheryl is the president of this, and Heather's this, and Brian's this. John Henson sadly passed away in 2014. Like,
Yeah.
I think you can give a rundown on that as opposed to the weird postscripts, I think, where it's like Kermit and friends are still entertaining people to this day. And it's like,
I thought those were kind of
ugh.
unnecessary. Like, I don't know if you needed any postscripts at all, but I guess if you're approaching it as somebody who doesn't know anything about the Muppets, maybe you do.
But I feel like watching this, you know that Kermit still exists. Like, I don't think you're watching this being like, whatever happened to
Right.
Kermit?
Yeah.
Well, and then the next thing in the documentary is the part where I was like, "Oh, Richard Hunt now will be mentioned," because
Uh-huh.
they have Fran Brill come in, and she's talking about when she auditioned for the Muppets, which would have been around the time of the Great Santa Claus switch, because that's when they were trying to hire a bunch of new puppeteers.
Mhm.
They do not mention the Great Santa Claus
Too
switch.
bad. Missed
We
opportunity. They should have released that at the same time as they released this documentary.
we get a nice picture of Thig at one point. There's a
Oh, yeah, at
nice,
the end in the,
yeah. But yeah, this is the perfect
mhm.
time for them to mention like Richard Hunt, like Fran Brill. Maybe I'm sure she did in her interview, which I'm sure they have hours of interviews. But like the fact that she and Richard Hunt both got hired at the same time feels like a pretty big part of the story.
Maybe they
And so
do
it's like,
mention him because I did write down as they were talking about everybody who got hired. I wrote his
mhm.
name down, so they must have said his name. They
They
didn't.
show him. They do not say his name. I watched
Oh,
this thing twice this weekend.
okay.
I the second time I
I
was on
just
the
knew who
lookout
he
because I was
was.
like, yes. They show him a bunch of times, and they show
Yeah,
his name on screen when they talk about the team expanding.
yeah.
Um,
We hear him
but
be Miss
we
Piggy in the first Miss Piggy thing that they talk, or like the first Muppet Show Miss Piggy thing that they talk about so much, but they also don't mention that.
Yeah, they don't say at the time Richard Hunt was performing him.
Yeah.
But we do get to hear from some other new members of the team, including Bonnie Erickson, Dave Goles, and sexy Miss Piggy fan himself, Michael Frith, our kindred spirit here on Kermitment.
He's the only guy who
Uh,
understands us in the world,
yeah,
basically.
yeah. He's the third, like, silent co-host of this podcast. He just doesn't know it. I also love seeing Bonnie Erickson because Bonnie Erickson just seems like a
Mm-hmm.
delight. Every time she's done some podcasts, both on Tough Pigs, and there was a Smithsonian podcast not that long ago that they did about the Muppets that are in the Smithsonian, and she was great on that. She is fantastic in
Yeah.
interviews.
There's a couple of parts. I don't quite remember what she said, but it was definitely like you could tell that she was like, "What the fuck is this guy talking about?"
Yeah.
Or like you'd walk away and she'd like probably roll her eyes and be like, "All right." I like this part a lot because this is where they're talking about where they're like expanding the team and they're showing the kind of like paper cutout of the team growing, and then they talk
Mm,
about that what he was doing was finding people and putting together and trusting them. And I like that they kind of don't pretend like he did make all of this stuff. They don't pretend like he
right.
was actually the person like sculpting every puppet or anything like that. He just like did that at first and then constructed the mechanism to help him do that, and that they don't pretend like they do with Walt Disney, where it's like I'm sure most people probably think Walt Disney like sat at the drawing table and drew Snow White at this point
Right.
because they gloss over the fact that there was a whole company that he had working for him, but they don't do that with Jim, and I think that's like valuable.
And this is when they start to talk about him feeling boxed into children's entertainment as Sesame Street became a success.
Yep.
And he was like,
Time to do
"Nuh-uh, I need
something
to get out of
crazy
here."
again. Time to start making crazy Broadway shows.
And we get to see some test footage that we've never seen before
Yeah.
of some kind of truly wild full body puppets that
The
they
kind
had
of big
built for
blobby
a
guys,
potential.
is that right?
Yeah, there's one that sort of
Uh,
looks like he would be on the chessboard in Star Wars.
oh,
And then
yeah,
there's
right.
one like just sort of spiky creature
Mhm.
that they're sort of just interacting with each other.
Yeah, it looks a
Um,
lot like some of the weird stuff we've seen European people do on Jim Henson Presents the World of Puppetry.
mhm. But yeah, I think that was fascinating. They kind of rushed through the fact that he was working on all these different kind of ideas because I guess none of them were successful.
Right.
But Lisa mentions that he also in this time made Hey Cinderella and The Frog Prince, and in her words, one that hardly anybody has seen,
Yeah, that was
The
weird.
Musicians of Bremen.
I don't know why anybody would have been more likely to see the other two, except I guess that Kermit is in them. But isn't Kermit in Muppets Musicians of Bremen too?
He is, but he's not as big of a
He's not
part,
a
I
star in
guess.
it. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, they would have slapped him on the VHS box to sell some copies, but
Yeah,
he was not really a featured player.
yeah.
But a little dig at Muppet Musicians of Bremen there. And this is the weird part. I found it a little weird, where everyone starts talking about how strong Jim was, even though he was
Yeah,
so
that
skinny and tall.
and that comes up a few more times too. It's like I think it's Frank specifically who keeps saying like he was a frail giant. Yeah, very odd.
Had a whim of steel.
Yeah,
He had pneumonia and would just like not sleep for days, and he was fine.
yeah. That's just like what? That's just like a guy thing, you know. Guys don't like to go to the doctor. We know this.
Well, I think it's also a fascinating choice that it is going through all these people talking about like Jim was such a hard worker, all this, da, 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 and it wraps up with Heather Henson being like, "Yeah, even on family vacations, he was working.
Yeah,
Like that's not always a
it's
positive
not
thing."
good. It was bad for all of us.
Yeah, which is when they pivot into talking about Jim and Jane growing apart as Jim got a little bit more famous than Jane ever wanted either of them to be.
This part I was a little unclear on because it talks about Jim wanting to talk about the kids and Jane wanting to talk about the company, and then it talks about like Jane wanting to have a family, but then it talks about Jim wanting her to raise a family. So it kind of like feels like everybody has a different version of what exactly was going on here. Where to me it seems
Yeah.
like she wanted to be like maybe she was looking for a way that it could be like more of a family company, which it became eventually, just not with her in
Hmm.
it. Like she was trying to find her way to like have a life with him and their kids and this is also speculation and the company. But then the documentary, it's like some people are saying she didn't want anything to do with that, and some people are saying she wanted everything to do with that. That's what she wanted to talk to him about, but he wouldn't talk to her about it. And that part was like, what? And what's the Declaration of Independence? Like, I know what it is, but they talk about it and they don't really like talk about it. And they never say like, oh, they had like a understanding and Jim was like doing his thing. They just skirt around it so much in a way that at the end you're like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, later on they even mentioned the apartment that he got in New York, which because we've talked about it here and we read it in Brian J. Jones's biography,
Yeah.
that's the apartment where Jim gets it, tells Jane, "Hey, I got this new apartment," and she's like, "Oh, I can't wait to decorate it." And he's like, "Well,
Well, you're
I'm
not living
actually doing
here.
this one on my own. You are not going to
Right.
live here."
That was maybe a part where
And
they sugarcoated it way more than they needed to.
yeah, but I totally agree. This section is weird because they say Jim had traditional expectations of a wife, and Jane wanted to rebel against the concept of the perfect wife.
Right.
While at the same time, Jane is in there saying, like, Jim had respect for women, but he assumed that I would only be interested in one of two things, either what the kids are doing or what he is doing. So to me, hearing from Jane, I think she is saying she wanted to have something that was her own
Mm-hmm.
life, away from the kids, away from Jim and his business. And that's what she felt like she wasn't getting because Jim was just like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm going to go do all this work stuff to make all the money. You'll stay here with our 5 kids and take care of them."
Right.
But there is a mixed message in there because Cheryl and I think Lisa are both saying something along the lines of she was trying to push back against that. She didn't like these expectations being put on her. And in that same section, it sort of wraps up with Brian saying, "My mom wanted to devote her life to kids and my dad didn't."
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, that doesn't really match up with what everyone else was just saying, though. Like, it
Right.
sounds like what she wanted was something different, something new, like something outside of the family dynamic, her own life. And to wrap that section up with, well, my mom was devoted to kids and my dad wasn't, is kind of a weird wrap up of that section.
Totally. Yeah. I was glad they came back and explored Jane
Yeah.
because I thought that was gonna be kind of it. And it was like, well, that was a weird way to end their relationship. But then they do thankfully come back and kind of flesh or that part of her life out a little bit more. But I just think the part where they're talking about sitting around the table and she kept asking about work and he wouldn't talk about it was like, who really want, like, what did people really want here? What was actually going on?
Right. Because the tone that they're talking about that was that Jim was the bad guy.
Yeah.
But if you just heard that story from someone, it might be like, oh, wait, was Jim Henson the one interested in what the kids were up to? And like, why is it bad that he didn't want to talk about business at the dinner table? Was it because he refused to talk to Jane about the business? Like she wasn't supposed to know about it? Like, I'm not sure
Yeah.
what picture we're trying to paint in that
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I guess to me, it both ways are him the bad guy because he wants to separate out his work life and his family life. But the person that he built his family with is the person he built his company with and then said, sorry, you're pregnant. I guess you have to not be part of this anymore.
Yeah, there's a quote from Jane in there basically saying that like when she got pregnant and started having kids, Jim didn't see her as dependable. But they also make a note of saying in that, I think Cheryl says it, that Jane didn't believe in divorce, which
Right.
explains why they would be married for the rest of his life.
Yeah, that felt like a little piece of the puzzle that we didn't have before.
Yeah, I don't think we've heard that specifically
Mm-hmm.
before. And I think we've just always wondered of like, okay, well, they're like legally separated at some point, and they're definitely publicly separated, but they also travel together a lot later on. But yeah, I
Yeah.
that's again, I think like there's times where I like wish they had spent more time discussing that, because they talk about the Declaration of Independence section and how she decided to say like, hey, no, I need my own life. And then 5 minutes later, they're like, and we took a family trip to Europe. And it's like, oh,
Right.
why
Well,
why
then
did
what
she
was
come
that?
with? Like, what was this family dynamic? What was going on here? It's kind of weird.
Yeah. She's just endlessly fascinating and cool.
Yeah.
And like,
Hmm.
I loved seeing all this footage of her just like hanging out and hearing people talk about like how rebellious and cool and funny she was.
Now it's time to talk about the Muppet Show. We discuss very briefly the pilots, or they don't mention the Valentine show at all. Just sex and violence.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to hear what we thought about sex and violence, you can go listen to that in episode 17 of this podcast,
Yeah.
where we had Brian J. Jones himself on the podcast to discuss sex and violence.
Yeah. You can see a version of the show where Floyd, Pepper, and Sam the Eagle are the main characters. Very odd.
And probably a very naive Matt and Sam talking about where they'd be in a couple of years and what they'd be talking about on this podcast. And then we get our minute of the documentary all about SNL, which again, we pretty much talked about at this point because it is only a minute long. They show a weird clip and they show Chevy Chase talking about how it got canceled. But this was one of the things where I was like, I wish they had maybe talked a little bit more about its impact, or how, other people outside of the show itself reacted to it.
Now thinking more about people who had kind of an outside perspective on stuff, I do feel like when they talked to Rita Moreno, that was like
Mm-hmm.
awesome. And I wish they had talked to Lily Tomlin. That would have been great.
Or Lorne Michaels.
Oh, Lorne. That would have been amazing.
If you had Lorne Michaels in here talking about
These
the first
fucking
season of SNL and the
Muppets.
Muppets, or Dan Aykroyd or Chevy Chase,
Oh, Dan
like
would
have one
talked
of
about the
them.
Muppets. Come on. Yeah. You're right. I wasn't thinking about it in terms of people who've overlapped with them, like famous people, but I do think like them stepping into that world, seeing, and then from their perspective, like what Jim was like, what it was like singing with Scred on stage
Right.
during this period.
Because I think the Jennifer Connelly and Rita Moreno pieces are used pretty well, and I do think they could have used just a sprinkling of more people like that.
Like Candace Bergen would have been great.
Right.
Who's the Sound of Music lady?
Julie Andrews.
Julie
Julie
would
Andrews,
have
somebody
been
who
great.
worked with the Muppets so many times.
Yeah, she's probably always hanging out like in the Disney front office or something, like the waiting room.
Come on, we'll make Princess Diaries 3 if you're in this Jim Henson documentary. Come on.
Yeah, exactly.
But then the next 12 minutes, I wanted to, reissue that because it's the same amount of time they spent on Sesame Street, is all about the Muppet Show. They talk about having to design a bunch of new characters, the old English music hall style of the theater itself. And then we get a collection of clips mostly exclusively from early Muppet Show, like season 1 episodes.
Right. And we learn a whole lot about Lord Lou Grade, which is fascinating.
Those two next to each other, every time they showed a picture of Jim and Lord Lou Grade, I'm like, those are the opposite people.
That's what they say too. He's got his little hippie shirt on, and Lord Lou is dressed like what you would think somebody named Lord Lou would be dressed like.
Well, and he's just the most like hairless man. He's just got
yes,
bald head, no beard, and then they're standing next to Jim with just like the biggest, longest hair and the biggest, bushiest beard. And I'm just like, yeah, it's just like a woolly willy, and then you shake it and you have Lord Lou Grade.
Oh wow, you're right. And then he was a Charleston dancer, and seeing that picture of him back in time where he looked exactly the same.
It looked like a deep fake. Like, we need a young picture of Lord Lou Grade. What is he going to doing? I don't know. He's a Charleston dancer? It's like, all right.
Yeah, I'm sure he was probably like 25 in that picture, but he was already looked exactly like he did when he was like 65.
We then get a surprisingly long section about Miss Piggy.
Yeah, which
which
is great. How could you not? You get more about Miss Piggy than you do about Kermit by actually a huge portion. We don't spend any time explaining who Kermit is, do we? Maybe a second he's like he's my alter ego, but
but we don't get a single mention of him not being a frog and then becoming a frog, really. Like, they
yeah.
touch on that very, very briefly, that he was just kind of a random Muppet. But the fact that we have to tell the whole story of Piggy learning how to karate chop
Yeah.
in a Jim Henson documentary, what
It's
are we
very
doing,
odd.
guys?
That is very odd. But you know what? I realized while it was showing it shows her this skit where she kind of breaks out. It's the Muppet Glee Club skit where she's
Yeah.
voiced by Richard Hunt, and what she's doing is the Gladys voice. Had he already done Gladys
Yeah.
the cow at this point,
Ooh, that's a good question. I
or
actually
after
don't
she got
know.
after Miss Piggy got stolen from him? Did he say, "Well, I'll just make a cow do the same thing I was thinking of for this pig"?
I think at this point he had already been doing Gladys.
That makes sense to me.
And there is, I literally just read this, and I'm sorry I don't remember more about it, but there is a good chunk in the Richard Hunt biography about this
Oh, okay.
specifically. So they do touch on the Gladys, Miss Piggy,
Yeah, it's just
similar.
I never put it together that the joke of both those characters is the same. That it is a
Yeah.
farm animal being like a diva.
But this is also when we get Rita Moreno involved in the documentary. And yeah, she is one of the best parts because she tells a story that I had never heard about when they were filming the fever section with Animal, that she could not make it through without
Yeah,
laughing.
yeah.
And Jim was like, well, Rita, we don't do overtime here. So you need to get this right.
His-
Otherwise, this next take is the one that's going in the show.
Our second thinly veiled dig at America, where he's like, "This is England, and we don't do overtime in England."
Well, yeah, because we had heard stories about how they would just shut off the lights in the studio
Oh.
once it was time.
And
There's
then
like,
go take
nope,
their
you're
tea
done.
break or something too, and he would
Yeah.
get pissed about that also.
Yep.
Oh wow, other countries have it a little bit more figured out in some respects, huh? Have we seen that footage of Frank in the couch do it to Roger Moore?
Yeah.
We have that.
That's
Okay.
from of Muppets and Men, where we get him shoving his hand up in the
Right.
couch.
Okay. I don't know how his arm didn't snap off. It just seems like, how do you do that? But
Well, and to instill so much life in the puppet while
right.
also being at such an awkward angle,
Yeah.
controlling the rod from underneath there. There's something in that where I didn't notice it the last time, or if I did, I forgot, where he's talking to the behind the scenes camera and you can see someone shoving the rod down through the hole as like, hey,
Oh.
Frank, here you go. Here's your rod. Here's your rod. And it's like moving around a lot and he doesn't even notice it's there. And I'm like, I just imagine the person up there being like, come on, Frank, just grab it.
the
Just take
rod,
it.
dude.
And then it's time to discuss the Muppet movie. Kind of.
Yeah.
They spend about 3.5 minutes talking about the Muppet movie.
Yeah, I wrote down my note in this is just I wrote Muppet movie. So they must not have said much about it.
They show Jim getting in and out of his little water tank. And that's sort of the main thing they spend this 3.5 minutes on.
Right.
Was
That
just
took
sort
him
of like,
20
yeah,
minutes to get
you know
out.
the Muppet movie. Yeah, Jim had to do this weird thing where he got in the water. All right, moving on.
Yeah. And they do talk about them being in the real world. Like that.
They show some of the test footage, yeah, of the cows on the farm and stuff.
Yeah. Which is, I guess now that I think about it, like they make that seem, and I feel like a lot of stories make that seem like that was the moment that they realized the Muppets could exist out in the world or something like that. When really the Muppets are better and always have been better when they are existing out in the world, in my opinion. Like that is what they did in the 50s and 60s, and then they just had stopped doing that.
Right, like I feel like the talk shows kind of prove that you don't need a fantasy world for the Muppets to exist inside of.
It's like a story that's like the real story is the director just was doubting Jim for no reason, and Jim was like, "Look, dude, we've been doing this forever." But then the story kind of gets turned into like this is some formative moment for the Muppets, and because you hear the story a lot that like they took him out into the real world and it was unbelievable how well it worked, but like that story doesn't hold a lot of water to me, I guess.
Well, especially when you have Big Bird existing
Oh yeah,
and
with a
being
bunch of people. That's true.
Yeah. Like I don't remember at what point in this
Big Bird running the freaking New York Marathon.
But yeah, I guess it doesn't feel like that big of a stretch to me that it would have been hard to convince somebody that shooting this movie out in the real world would make sense.
Yeah.
Especially if they already had the script in place. It's like, wait,
That's
you're
true.
gonna do
Yeah.
like a car chase and all this other
You
stuff
want
like
us to
on a
build a whole
set?
carnival in here? We could just go find a carnival.
But I think one of the oddest moves in this entire documentary is that during this section where they're talking about the Muppets moving into movies, there is not a single mention of the Great Muppet Caper or Muppets Take Manhattan in this
Does Disney not?
entire documentary.
Disney doesn't own one of those, right?
They don't have the distribution rights to either of those,
Oh, okay.
which, sure, that could be the reason. But they also don't have Dark Crystal and Labyrinth distribution
Oh,
rights
yeah, that's
or
true.
Sesame Street.
Right.
So clearly they're okay working on this. I wonder if it's a somewhat corporate call because those two Muppet movies are not on Disney Plus.
Yes. Right.
And so if you're looking, to after this, if you want to go watch a Muppet thing after watching the Jim Henson documentary, you can't find those two here. I wonder if that was a call because it feels so strange to me
Mm-hmm.
to not have those two things be part of the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Because Great Muppet Caper is the first time Jim Henson directed a feature-length movie.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Huh.
And
I
they
mean, it
don't
must.
talk about his directorial debut at all.
Yeah. I wonder. I would love to, and we'll never know this. Know
Mhm.
what kind of cuts Disney called for, or like where they put their foot down on stuff.
Yeah, that was the one that felt the biggest to me as far as
Mhm.
like where I felt like, Disney putting their hand on the scale a little bit of just like,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe we don't really focus on those ones we don't
Yeah. I think at the
own.
end too, when they talk about the deal, and
Mm.
then they don't say, and then we said, no, thank you. They don't
Yeah,
really
that
say
that
that
deal
part.
didn't like really go through, and then Jim died,
Yeah.
and they were like, "Well, no deal." Like it took a long time after Jim's death to finally have the Disney buy the Muppets, but
Right.
it makes it feel like the deal was already sealed. Jim died, and now the Muppets are a Disney property.
Which is what I thought happened. I didn't know that.
Right?
I didn't know that there was a gap until
Yeah.
I learned it on this show. But
Yeah.
Disney doesn't. I don't think they want you to know that. They want you to think,
No.
oh, we'll still buy your Muppets anyway, even though Jim's dead.
They want you to have that shot in there where Jim says, "I think this is the perfect place for my characters to live."
That honestly, that part made me so sad. We'll get to it, I guess. But
Mm.
at the end, when they're like, Jim was a big Disney freak, I was like, I would love to know more about that. I want to know about Jim flying down to Orlando, going to Disney MGM Studios.
Just drinking around the world at Epcot. And
Yeah, I want to hear more about him being a big Disney freak
just
because that just is like dropped in. So, like, you love Disney World. What? He was a
famous
Disney adult?
adult Jim Henson.
Yeah. And then to be that part, yeah, that's when I started to get teared up because he was like,
Mm.
because it does. And Rachel was sitting with me. I skipped ahead to the end, but she was like, it does actually make sense for Disney to own the Muppets, like seeing Jim talking
Yeah.
about it this way. And then I was thinking, like, yeah, like if they had bought them at this point and Jim had lived a little bit longer, I think things would be really different.
Right.
I think they would have learned how to use them from Jim, and if he'd probably still be alive even, or would be, he'd be a billion years old, but he would have protected them and like helped them operate in this corporate structure, I think, better than they do.
Yeah, they talk a bit more about that in the Brian J. Jones biography of the deal was essentially a thing where Jim would handle like a lot of the creative stuff and hand the business
Right.
stuff off to Disney, and that the agreement would involve him basically agreeing to stick around for a set number of years. That
Mm-hmm.
they weren't just buying the Muppets, they were buying Jim Henson and the Muppets with the agreement that he would stick around for a while
Yeah.
to be involved. Sort of like the opposite of the deal they gave George Lucas for Star Wars,
You
where they're like,
have
"We
to
want Star
leave,
Wars,
George."
you're not going to be involved." But then it moves on from the movies, just saying, "Hey, everybody, Jim's super famous and works too hard now. He's fashionable, he's recognized more, and he's driving
cowboy
a Kermit
chic.
car."
He's driving a Kermit car. Yeah.
My favorite part of the cowboy chic thing, and I felt this was the most unnecessary but hilarious thing they did,
Uh-huh.
is they fade in the corner of the shot Brian Henson because he's wearing the exact same outfit as Jim
Ah,
Henson is wearing at some point.
I miss that. Why?
He's
This is
wearing
like
like a red button-up shirt with like a black leather vest thing over it, and
Oh.
they're like talking about this, and it's just like, hey, look, they look the same.
Why'd they do that?
But it's like, I think it's literally just because like the editor noticed it. He's like, whoa.
This is hilarious. Yeah, I felt bad in that part too because he was like, was he really California cowboy chic? I guess I haven't seen a lot of evidence about that, but
I loved hearing Bonnie Erickson be the person to talk about it though,
that's
because
true.
I feel like
Yeah,
if you have the kids talk about the fashion sense changing, that's like a different read on it.
like
But
a
having somebody who
costume
was like a
designer.
coworker,
She's a
like if
costume
I
designer
just,
too, right? Was that?
yeah.
Yeah.
So if I started coming to work wearing like polyester suits one day, you guys are gonna be like, hey Matt, what's going on
Matt's
here?
really let his new job go to his head. Matt starts dressing like Don Draper.
Yeah, I start wearing suits every day to work.
Yeah.
That's gonna be called out by my coworkers.
Yeah.
But this is around the time when Brian starts talking about the fact that there was an innocence lost
Hmm.
in Jim from this sudden, rich and famous attitude he's got going on.
Mm-hmm.
They share the scene of Jane from Henson's place that we discussed before, and in Henson's place, it is not treated as a super important line. But I remember when we talked about it, we were like, I think that's revealing a lot about their relationship.
Uh-huh.
And apparently the editors of this documentary agreed with us because it's the part where she talks about fame being troublesome and how success has less peace. And especially used in this context, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, totally. Maybe they listen to our show.
Sam, I don't
Maybe,
think so.
maybe.
Well, then they decided to move on from the Muppet Show and that time period, much as Jim did. And they show a couple moments from the Muppet Show rap party, which is pretty much just Jim deciding to not give a speech because he's not good at it.
Yeah, and he's right. This is like I feel like lately we've been talking about how much better he's gotten at public speaking, but this is from back when he wasn't good at public
This is before
speaking.
that era, yeah. So now it's time for Jim to get weird as we move on to the Dark Crystal era. This is, I think, what surprised me. So Dark Crystal gets 5 minutes, Labyrinth gets 5 minutes.
Uh-huh.
All of the other Muppet movies are summed up into one conversation about the Muppet movie itself in a 3.5 minute section of this movie.
Well, maybe
So,
they're
like,
just
I
pretty
get it.
straightforward,
Yeah, it's just very odd to me that like people's touch points of Jim Henson are like a lot of people have seen the Muppet movie, and that's it.
Yeah, but it's more interesting to hear about high-profile failures than the successful things
Yeah.
everybody loves, right?
I guess I would have liked to hear even a bit more then about the decision making of Jim being like, I gotta do weird stuff now. I gotta get away from this.
Yeah, that's true. They kind of almost just blame it on Brian Froud, I feel like. Like they're like, he saw his work and he
Yeah.
loved it and he was like, time to get weird.
But they call it the beginning of the next chapter of creativity, talk a bit about the origins of the creature shop. And mostly with Dark Crystal, talk about the issues where the screenings, where they didn't have the English language in the movie and everyone hated it.
Everybody hated it. As well they should, in my opinion. Talk about Dave Goals almost dying. Dave talks about falling off the stage and thinking that Jim has really lost it this time. I thought that was a good part.
They've also spent some time in this section comparing Dark Crystal to E.T.
Oh, yeah.
He's like, well, E.T. had he's like, E.T. had just come out. And in that, they had to convince people to be, believing in this one fantasy creature. And then Dark Crystal comes out, and it's like, you have to believe everything in this over-the-top fantasy movie. Good luck.
When E.T. showed up, Rachel was like, oh, no. But I mean, E.T.'s a great puppet. That doesn't really get a lot of credit for being
you know what
a
annoyed me?
What?
They used a shot from the,
the remake
40th
kind of stuff?
the CGI face E.T.
Well, I've watched the old not that E.T. lately, and he's still great. But
that's the thing is like nowadays they put it out like on the 4K release. They give you the option of watching the original or the retouched version.
Yeah, right.
And I was like, this exists in 4K. There's great footage of the original puppet. And when you're talking about puppetry, it's kind of weird to use the retouched CGI ET.
I kind of disagree with what Dave's saying there, though, because I don't think the problem with the Dark
Mm,
Crystal is that you have to buy into things.
yeah.
I think almost the problem with the Dark Crystal is that it's too easy to buy into it. Like, you don't think about it's so good you don't think about that they're puppets, but then what you think about is how bad the story is.
Yes. Yeah, there is not a believability problem. Absolutely agree. I think maybe they were, like, wanting to contextualize the time period a bit. Be
Yeah,
like, "Hey, look,
totally.
some good weird movies were coming out too."
Yeah.
But then they have Heather Henson, talking about Jim not living in the house, around this time. This is
Mhm.
when he started living wherever the productions were happening. And this is another one where they make a weird clip choice while, they're talking about stuff, because we see a brief clip of Jim underneath the Muppets, and somebody asks
Oh,
him like,
yeah.
"Hey, can you talk a bit about what's going on?" And he says, "You're underneath the first Muppet orgy."
Jim was getting nasty around there.
I guess it's what they're implying, but I think he's on the set of the Muppet movie in that one, so it's also, like, earlier.
Yeah.
But that's just placed in the middle of the section where Heather's talking about her parents living apart. But they're
Uh-huh.
like, "Jim said the word orgy, so his marriage was in tatters."
Yeah. Yeah, she's talking about him, like, dating and stuff, and it's like, "He was fucking. How are we gonna show that? Here we go."
It's just also interesting to me that, like, this feels like a pretty sanitized Disney documentary, and then to include
Yeah.
the clip of Jim Henson saying Muppet orgy, I'm
Orgy.
like, "Alright, that feels like
Cool,
a
cool.
braver choice."
Yeah. I didn't like how they, zipped right past, Fraggle Rock.
Oh, yeah, no, that's, wild. That happens after they talk about Labyrinth, and Dave's just like, "Yeah, Jim said one day he wanted to make a show that stopped war, and that was Fraggle Rock." And then they just move on. Kinda wild, that Fraggle Rock, which I understand he's not as hands-on with Fraggle Rock, he's not there
Right.
for the day-to-day, but he was such a big part of the development of it and the importance of that show that I think it's interesting to not talk at
Yeah.
all about what he was hoping to do through his media.
And I mean, that came before Labyrinth, obviously, because we watched tons of it before Labyrinth. I
Yeah.
feel like Dark Crystal and Fraggle Rock are so, like, they're tied together in a kind of a weird way that I guess it does ruin the flow to be like, then he made Fraggle Rock, then he made this bad movie. But it does kind of make it be like, he made these two bad movies everybody hated. But that's not all he was doing. Like, it's kind of like busts on him unnecessarily in that part when there are like
Well,
bright spots.
it also lumps in Fraggle Rock with Storyteller and Jim Henson Hour,
Mm.
as sort of a,
Later
uh,
days, like bad, like boondoggle.
or at least I think it's Frank who says, when something failed, Jim always had some backup ideas. And so they present
Mm.
it as like, okay, this Dark Crystal and Labyrinth experiment didn't work out. So then he went and tried Fraggle Rock and the Storyteller,
Yeah, which is
where it's like, well,
disingenuous.
right, which Fraggle Rock was happening at the same time.
Right.
So yeah, it's an interesting framing of Fraggle Rock by just pretty much not including it at all as part of his story.
Yeah, it just makes him a little more sad sack too, to not be like, oh, he also had this other international super hit that everybody's heard of.
And one of the best things he's ever made.
Mm-hmm.
But Brian around this time is talking about one of the times he came home when he was about 18. He was going to boarding school. And it was his birthday, and his parents fought the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
And the kids, this is again when they're talking about the relationship between their parents. Lisa says that they just had different emotional realities, and that their whole worldview was dividing. And this is when Brian talks about how Jim got really into the idea of non-serious dating in his late 40s. But they also sort of breeze by in this section the time where Jim had to buy back all of his movies because Lord Lou Grade's company had sold the rights. And so Jim wasn't going to have any creative control anymore over his films. And so he had to take this big risk of spending essentially money that would eventually go to the kids
Mm-hmm.
on his old movies, hoping, I guess, that merchandise and licensing would eventually pay for what he spent. But this is sort of dropped in the middle of the discussion about their marriage.
Right.
And in a way that was a little unclear to me what exactly was happening, but basically talked about that there was like a legal separation and that Jane's ownership of the company went to the kids.
They're like legally separating, but then it's also like but they were still being nice to each other about business. And this feels like a plot line that's like started, but I don't really know what the resolution of it is, of like him buying this stuff, or like why.
Well, because they get into him buying the stuff back, and it's like, okay, wait, but is that the money that the kids would have gotten? Is that the like? Did you take
Hmm.
the shares essentially that you were promising to the kids? Did you like sell those and use that money to buy back your stuff? Like, where who is actually taking the risk? Who's losing out in this scenario? It's kind
Yeah.
of unclear.
Yeah. And there's like no, it's like a story. It's like when you start telling a story and then partway through the story, you're like, oh, there's not really an ending. This like story's bad. But then it's like, it's too late. I'm already telling the story. And then you just kind of like fizzle out at the end and everybody's like, okay.
Like, oh, that's it. Okay. And that kind of happens here too, because
Yeah.
they wrap this section up with Brian talking about the relationship again.
Hmm.
And this is when he says they were the love of each other's lives who couldn't live with each other,
Yeah.
which I think is a little
So
maybe simplistic, but I understand.
yeah, it's because it's hard when you're a kid to talk about your parents. It's
Yeah.
just like,
And it's hard when one of the people who's the love of the other's life wants to date 30-year-olds.
yeah. And nobody asked the other person what they want. So
Right. Yeah. 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 But then we do have the labyrinth section of this. Jennifer Connelly is here, which is great.
he must have
But
been a really nice guy because everybody says a million times he was such a nice guy.
yeah, it's interesting having Jennifer Connelly here after we just watched her when she was 15 in the
Yeah.
documentary of the Inside the Labyrinth, and sort of she's not like, talking about it in an entirely different way, but she definitely comes across more young and naive when this is
Hmm.
like her first big movie back in the day, when she was a kid in the Inside the Labyrinth documentary. Whereas now she's talking about like, oh my God, it was so much fun. They had me up on wires. They were throwing me around. It
Yeah, I
was
like that
great.
because all we've ever heard is Jim saying like, "Ugh, accidentally we made it too dangerous." So it was fun to hear her say, "That fucking ruled."
Yeah. Yeah, I think she was even saying like, yeah, throw me around more. Tie me up. I'll do this stunt. I'll do that. Let's do
Yeah.
it.
And it is like they show that footage of her zipping up and down the pit of hands so many times because it is
Hmm.
like it looks fun and it looks really cool.
Well, and they talk a little bit about how Jim wasn't used to directing humans. And so his
Mm-hmm.
directing style was a little rough, where I think Jennifer Connelly is talking and she's like, yeah, he just kind of walked over to me and was like, okay, so you're going to look over here and you're going to talk to the worm. And she's like, like this? Like, is this fine? Like, I don't really know what that means.
Yeah, but I guess at the same time, he knows that once she sees that worm, she's gonna be like, "Hello, worm.
Oh, hello, worm.
You're my best friend." Also, now Brian mentions like this is the beginning of animatronics at the creature shop, which I think is when I got mad about Fraggles because I was like, they
Mm,
make it seem like they invented the Waldo or whatever for Hoggle
yeah.
when the Gorgs had been doing that forever. And also before that, even there was, or like, so you don't do the Doozers dirty like this. You guys have done some crazy stuff for the Doozers.
Well, you also had robotic puppets in Emmett Otter.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Right.
Like Don Saleen and Faz Fazakis both like were working in robotics for quite a while before Hoggle came around. And
Yeah.
like, yes, Hoggle is quite the advancement, especially in like the face version that they'll eventually use for like
Mm-hmm.
Ninja Turtles and stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
Junior Gorg and the Pa and Ma Gorg are essentially the same kind of character as Hoggle.
Yeah. I would say that this was my least favorite part of the thing because the whole time I was just
Hmm.
thinking like they made it seem like Brian did all this. Like they
Right.
basically say like Jim, my dad told me to invent a robot puppet and I did.
Yeah.
But it's
I
like,
just figured it out.
you were building on so much other stuff.
That's
Yeah.
very true. They also weirdly in the moment, like in the middle of the labyrinth discussion, decide to focus on like what all of the other kids were drawn to, and I think it's
Oh
because
yeah.
they want to have that Brian moment of him working on the animatronics and being involved. But they randomly sort of throw in of like, well, we always knew Lisa was going to be an executive, and we knew
Mhm.
Cheryl was good with textiles and all this stuff.
They show
And
Bebop
it's
Bunny in that part. Did you notice him back there?
yeah, they show Cheryl working on some bunny picnic bunnies,
And
which
everyone's
you
favorite bunny, Bebop, back there with the sunglasses, Poochie style.
But then we see someone filming Jim, and it might be Brian, but it's a little
Yeah.
weird because he does mention his family, which would be a weird thing to say to your dad. But there's a person filming Jim Henson and asks, like, how's the movie going so far about Labyrinth? And Jim says, very earnestly, I think this will probably be the finest motion picture ever made. And who's ever behind the camera laughs,
Laughs.
and Jim takes great offense and says, what's that about? What are you laughing? What's that mean? Because it turns out, I think Jim thought he was making the best movie ever.
I think you might have been, because this part, and I don't know if my dad listens to this or not. This part
Whoa.
reminded me so much of my dad. And I can think of times when not just my dad, but anybody is
Yeah.
doing something that's not a good idea, or is like not like they just don't have like the self-awareness of it.
Yeah.
And then you have to when you're working on a project like this. But
Yeah.
but just to be from the outside, seeing your dad doing something where you're like, what are you doing? But you're my dad and I love you. This part, just the tone he had where he's like so hopeful is like heartbreaking and reminded me of my dad. Just like his tone was so dad like in this moment. That's why I think I assumed it was Brian, because it just seemed like a dad talking to his son and being like, this time I will really fulfill all my creative desires. This is what
Call up
this
our
is
old friend Orson and tell him, hey, Citizen Kane, in the garbage. We got
Yeah.
Labyrinth, Orson.
Yeah, just to be like, this is the thing that will make me happy is such a relatable. They're just like the little glimmer of that in this moment broke my heart.
Well, and it makes the fall even harder.
Yeah.
Because we've talked before about how Jim was, depressed after the Labyrinth failed. And they talk about that in this as well. But to have that be, sandwiched with him being like, I believe I'm making the best movie that's ever existed is rough. Because it's like immediately after that they're like, and the critics hated it.
Yeah. Which is, it's way better than Dark Crystal. So.
Oh, absolutely. I don't know if I'll ever rewatch Dark Crystal, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, I enjoyed it. When we talked about it, I was very much, I was bought in. I enjoyed my experience. But I have not thought about going back to Dark Crystal once since we watched it.
Mm-mm.
And after they talk about Jim feeling down after Labyrinth, this is when they touch on Fraggle Rock very briefly. We get a few lines about the storyteller. We get some brief clips from the Jim Henson Hour and discussing his interest in advancing technologies. And they show him puppeteering Waldo C. Graphic.
We see a lot of Waldo C. Graphic in this.
We see more Waldo than we do Rolf, I think.
That's right. Is that because Waldo's in a Disney ride?
Yeah, it just says it just pops up on screen and be like, you want to see more Waldo C. Graphic? Come to Muppet Vision 3D.
Buy a ticket to Disney World. Yeah. They show a clip of him filming Muppet Division 3D too. They show the end when Kermit's on the fire truck.
There's a brief moment in this where I think they might have been. I think they show a clip from Muppet Family Christmas at one point.
Oh yeah.
We see Bert and Ernie in their winter gear next to a snowman, and it's very brief, but I'm pretty sure it's the same outfits they're wearing in Muppet Family Christmas, and so obviously that's something we haven't talked about yet. So there might be more behind the scenes footage than I know from that, but I had never seen behind the scenes footage of Muppet Family Christmas before.
And no mention of Muppets Go to Disney World.
Which is wild because that's happening during this discussion where they're talking about Jim deciding to sell the company to Disney, Frank saying he wants to get back to not worrying about the business and just get back to having fun. And I don't know. They didn't even show a clip from the Muppets at Walt Disney World.
Maybe that's another corporate thing where they're like, well, if we show a clip, then people will want to see it. And we are not going to show it to them for some reason.
And we mentioned it at the beginning of this, but I think it's worth touching on at this point before we get to the end. Muppet Babies is not mentioned or shown at all in this entire documentary.
Nope. Didn't make the cut.
I was fully expecting to see like a high-res scan, super high-quality version of Muppet Babies, which when we talked to Matt Danner, he said exists.
Right.
That like he helped them work on restoring old Muppet Babies episodes. And so the fact that there's not even a clip, a quick shot of a Muppet Baby was interesting.
Yeah, maybe that doesn't fit the narrative of like he didn't want to be a crass businessman.
Or maybe, like you said, maybe somebody's going to want us to put this on Disney Plus if they see that we restored it.
I'm almost wondering with the Muppets Disney World thing if Disney doesn't like showing things that show old versions of the park.
I mean, they've put up some of the old Walt Disney talking about Disneyland
But that's so
things.
old. Maybe that's okay. But maybe there's
Mm.
something about like 90s era Epcot they don't want people to see, or like they don't want people to, I don't know. Maybe they also don't want people to be like, bring back the frog fountains. Where are the frog fountains? Or like whatever. I don't know. Maybe those are still in there. But if we watch it and we're like, this is the most problematic special I've ever seen in my life, no wonder they can never show this. I'm not sure.
And we have on record how many times Sam has said that's his favorite Muppet thing.
I just watched it, so yeah, that's gonna look really bad for me, Matt. But I don't think it is. But I don't
Like,
know.
oh wow, Sam, this is what you've staked your reputation on. Interesting.
I think it's genuinely the Muppet thing I watch the most by a factor of at least 10, but it could be more.
I think that one holds up. I don't think there's any
Okay.
problems with that one. But completely out of the blue, while they're talking about this Disney deal, Frank's like, yeah, Jim had so many new ideas and so many things he wanted to do. I remember he called and said, hey, Frank, I want to talk to you about something. And that's the last I ever talked to him. But I was sort of shocked at how quickly and how out of the blue his death is introduced, because
Yeah.
I think what they're going for is like, yeah,
This is
that's what it was
how it
like.
felt. Yeah.
But I don't know. I feel like I would have liked to hear more about the time before his death, like what he was actually doing. Not the day to day, but the fact of, the Arsenio Hall show, that he was doing that and what was going on
Mm-hmm.
in the lead up to his death. I don't know. It feels like that was another thing where I feel like I could feel the choice being made there, where they didn't want to dwell on it.
I guess I thought that was effective.
Mm.
I think it took me by surprise in the way that I think they meant to do it.
Yeah, which I think is what I think you're right. I think that's what they're going for.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought, yeah, it just felt a little odd. It makes it feel like it was something where, it was he got hit by a car. He got like something happened so out of the blue, weird and random, that he just died young like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't need them to, again, to dwell on the sickness or not going to the doctor and stuff like that.
I guess to me that ties in with the through line of like he was right. Like time
Yeah.
is all of our enemies, and he was right to feel like he was racing against it. Like even though that's unfair, he was correct about his thesis of the world being a race against the grave, basically, more than he ever knew he was right. So to frame it like, then this suddenly happened. He was in the middle of having a lot of fun with his friend Michael Eisner, and then all of a sudden, he's dead. I don't know. I guess that's just like reflected his view of how things were going to work, and was actually how it worked. But I'm not looking forward to that episode. I'm going to be really sad.
Where we just discussed the memorial.
Yeah, because it's like,
Yeah.
I don't know, it's stupid, but we know this guy really well. we've like speculated so much about his life and what he thinks about, in a way that I feel like is not is like informed by actual context. Like we're not, like we've thought about this guy so hard,
Yeah.
and know him as an imperfect person, and know him as like a creative, like, so that episode's just gonna be like, ugh, rough.
Yeah, I think that's the discussion around him, the memorial footage, all of that is extremely effective. I think both as, people like us who have done so much watching of this man's life, but I think also just in regards to people who are just watching this documentary and that's their main experience of Jim Henson, I think it is really effective. And, I think they show a lot of the people who are talking at his funeral. They show the reactions of people trying to have a good time, laughing at jokes and stuff at his memorial service. And so, yeah, I think you do get the feeling of, this is a complicated man who, had a bit of a weird life, maybe not the best relationship with his kids and wife, but at the end of the day, a very beloved person.
Yeah.
And they make the bold choice to wrap up the documentary with a shot of Jim from the timepiece covering up a dead body with a sheet.
That was maybe a little bit much. The wink, I guess, kind of brings it. Like, I don't think he would mind that, but
No,
it
but it
is
felt like a
kind of
weird,
like,
like, Andy Kaufman-y
whoa.
kind of like
Yeah.
kind of weird joke that
Yeah.
was definitely not the intention of Timepiece necessarily to be used in that way, but
Yeah.
I don't
I
know.
thought that
Felt
was
like a
very
weird thing to go
interesting
out on.
too. Uh-huh.
Because after Frank has the nice moment where, like,
Yeah.
they had cut it in the trailer where Frank said something along the lines of, "If Jim was here today, I think I would just say thank you."
Yeah. The actual
And
quote is so much more Frank like. I loved that so much.
yeah, he's like, "If Jim was here right now, I'd be like, Jim, get out of the way. I'm busy. I'm doing something. Get out of
Yeah.
here."
Well, he says like I would have something I'd want to say to him in my heart, but I would be being cranky and I would just say get out of my way.
But then that's where it wraps up, and we get a little bit of a collage montagey thing projected on the cube, which is the only time we see any images from Muppets Take Manhattan or The Great Muppet Caper
Hmm.
is projected onto that. I still don't think we see any Muppet Babies, surprisingly, even though
No,
they're including like everything he's ever done.
I think a Muppet Baby would have really jumped out at me in a way I would have remembered.
But that was Jim Henson, Idea Man. I think a pretty good documentary that I think because of the world we live in this podcast,
It's challenging
just
to think about.
yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's going to teach a lot of people a lot about Jim Henson, and I think maybe I'm worried about it making him seem like he didn't succeed ever or something. Like
Mm, yeah.
the highs are not as highlighted as the lows are.
Yeah, we don't see him accepting Emmys and like awards
Right.
really. The only mention of an award we get is when Jane talks about him winning a local Emmy and having Richard
Yeah.
Nixon present it to him.
Right. Right. So I don't know. It just doesn't. It really does like one thing so striking about Jim is that he failed so much, and but I think everybody does, and it's just like looking into his failures and how he learned from them has been a really interesting part of this podcast.
Mhm.
But I don't know. I guess it just like paints that the failure part of his career is like very forefront in this. I think.
And I think it does, like you said, with the timepiece part, a little bit go like, see, he was right.
Yeah.
Like and which again I think also leans a bit into the like everything he did was worth it, good or bad.
Hmm.
Because at the
Yeah.
end he was correct in that he was going to run out of time.
Yeah. And he had to cram as much as he could into his life.
Yeah.
And he did cram a ridiculous amount of stuff in. Yeah. And I think it was successful in presenting. It didn't present a portrait of him in a like that I didn't hadn't already had, which I guess is
Right.
successful. It means we weren't totally wrong, and it means they're not totally wrong, I guess.
Yeah, I wasn't shocked by anything in this
Yeah.
documentary, which I feel like would have been surprising, if we
Yeah.
had done 230 hours of a podcast about Jim Henson and his work and they could reveal something to us.
Yeah. If it had been really wrong though, then we could have blown the lid off of it.
Right. But I do think there will be moments in here for people who, again, haven't spent 230 hours
Yeah.
talking about Muppets to it'll surprise them. And I also enjoy, and this is, I'm sure, a little bit of the corporate editing that so often now when you have people like Frank Oz or other people reflecting back on the Muppets, you only hear the bad side.
Mm-hmm.
Like they'll only interview Frank to ask how he thinks of the current Muppets, and he'll say something like,
Right.
"Ah, they
Right.
don't talk to me anymore. I don't watch what they do." Da, da, da. And people are like, "Frank Oz hates Disney and the
Yeah.
Muppets," which
Right.
I'm sure there's part of Frank who does maybe hate some of the things they're doing, but it's nice to have him reflecting and being a bit more nostalgic about things,
Yeah.
and talking about the good old days.
Yeah. And also the people who write that stuff think about it 10,000 times more than Frank ever
Yeah,
thinks about it, probably.
yeah, he's just off sitting around naked with his puppets. Well, Sam, that does it for our little detour outside of our chronological timeline. Did you have time to watch any non-Muppet things this week, though?
This will be out of our chronological timeline of things that we got to watch, too, because in the next episode, we'll have transported back in time.
Yeah, we recorded these things a little out of order.
What? You know what? I started playing Stardew Valley too.
Hey,
Stardew Valley as well.
Yes.
I'm
Not
trying
a
really.
secret sequel.
I'm trying really hard to like it, but I don't know.
I have not touched it since the last time we talked about it.
I know that's gonna make a lot of people upset. I don't hate it, but and I usually really like, I like building games like that, like Minecraft. It's not like
Yeah.
Stardew Valley exactly, but it's just like a little too slow for me maybe, and I
Mm.
don't. It's too late in I can't get into Stardew Valley now. I just don't have time. I simply don't have time.
It feels like something that I'd have to play video games for multiple hours a day to be in the mindset to play it, and that's not
Yeah,
currently my life.
yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
I don't know if me and Stardew Valley are going to be friends.
So that was some of what I did. Yeah, have you seen that show Hacks? I feel like you talked about Hacks once, maybe.
Nope,
It's a it's
never heard
a
of it.
it's a show on
Oh, you
HBO.
mentioned it I think once before that you watched like
Yeah,
the first season
it's
with
on
Gene
Max.
Smart.
Yeah, Gene Smart. It's on Max. I don't watch it actively, but Rachel watches it, so then I get it through osmosis. It's
Yeah.
funny. I feel like
Mm.
I don't find a lot of shows funny anymore because I'm a nasty old man, but it's like it's funny. There's like some pretty good one-liners in it, but it's like a drama comedy sort of.
Yeah.
But so like you don't expect the like really funny parts, which are like
Mm.
heightened like comedy parts in this drama,
Right.
but they're really effective when they happen.
Hmm.
So that new season just came out, and we watched the first couple episodes of that, and I liked it. How about you?
Nice. I was playing some Fortnite the other day.
Oh, really? The new season with
Yeah.
the post-apocalyptic thing going on.
Yeah, I was playing a little bit of that. I've been playing a lot of F124 because that just came out recently.
Uh-huh.
And then been trying to watch some of the newer Doctor Who specials.
Oh, what do you mean trying?
Well, so previously we were on a mission to watch all of the other
Oh,
like
before you
Doctor
got
Who
there.
stuff before we
Right.
got to the new. At a certain point, we were just not moving very quickly through it, and
There's
the
so
new stuff started
much.
coming out, and we were like,
Uh-huh.
"Well, but we kind of want to check out this new stuff." And I've heard some not great things about the most recent seasons, so
Yes.
I think it's okay if we skip ahead.
Uh-huh.
So at some point, I'm sure I'll go back and fill in the gaps. But yeah, we were watching the new Doctor Who specials. They put out like 4 at the end of last year to transition us over to the new Doctor. And yeah, we watched all 4 of those. They're great. I think they're a lot of fun. And the last one, the Christmas special, pretty much a labyrinth.
Oh, really?
A bunch of goblins steal a baby and bring it to the Goblin King.
Oh, British people love that stuff.
The only difference is these goblins are going to eat the baby, and the Goblin King
Ah.
looks like Jabba the Hutt.
Oh, not sexy, eh?
Not sexy David Bowie.
It would have been that lady, that Texan interviewer lady's nightmare. Her
Yeah.
favorite movie, Labyrinth.
Bobby, whatever. She would have
Yeah.
hated this one.
You put Jabba the Hutt in my favorite movie, my least favorite guy in my most favorite movie?
But yeah, I thought it was really interesting that you it was one of those things where I'm watching it and there's like a hint of like little creepy creatures in the episode, these goblins, and then she gets a baby to take care of, and you're like, oh, are the goblins gonna steal the baby? And then they
Oh,
do. Then she walks in and the crib is empty, and you're like, the goblin stole the baby.
what the
And then they're like,
hell?
take it to the Goblin King, and I'm like, oh shit, this is just Labyrinth. There is a Muppet inspired character in this episode. This isn't going to make any sense, but when they're trying to feed the baby to the Goblin King, there's a musical break, and there's a goblin band that is singing and performing, and the doctor yells at the main female goblin singer, like, "Shut up, Janice!" And
Oh,
the creator or the writer of Doctor Who has come out to say that he was inspired by Janice, the Muppet, to name that character Janice.
okay. But it's good? You like it?
Yeah, I like the new Doctor. I like the new companion. I'm excited to dive into their season. It feels like a good jumping on point for
That makes sense.
Doctor Who fans. Like I think Disney is intentionally doing that since it's a Disney Plus series now.
Right.
There's definitely things that you're gonna watch and be like, what the hell are you talking about? But that's always been true of Doctor Who. They've always referenced 70 years of lore that you're never gonna know.
Yeah, and a lot of times it doesn't even matter. Like, that's just like a little bonus thing to know.
Yeah. So yeah, if you've never watched Doctor Who before, I think the new season, specifically the Christmas special, is a good place to start. I think it's called The Church at Ruby Road is the special. Yeah, jump on board. You get to see the coolest doctor that's ever existed, because other doctors have tried to be cool and have failed miserably. Ncuti Gatwa is actually very cool.
Well, who's not cool?
All the others.
You don't think Peter Capaldi's cool?
Peter Capaldi's the closest to
He's
cool,
pretty
but he's
cool.
cool in a very different way. Like there's a scene when Ncuti Gatwa is at a club, like dancing in a tank top and a kilt, and I'm like, oh,
Sure.
he is pulling this off and looks like amazing doing it.
Yeah.
You're not going to have David Tennant out there in a tank top and a kilt fitting in this club scene. Well, before we get out of here, gotta let Sam and the audience know what we're watching next time.
I know. We already watched
Sam.
it. Oh, okay.
They don't know the tricks of the trade. They think we watch this 5 minutes before we record every single week. The episode comes out unedited. We don't ever mess up or say anything wrong. This is exactly what we record. It goes out clean. Next time, we're returning to our regularly scheduled mid-'80s Muppets as we continue season 3 of Muppet Babies with 3 more episodes from October of 1986 titled Muppets in Toyland, The Muppet Broadcasting Company, and Kermit Goes to Washington.
I bet this time we're gonna really like it.
And that's not even all we watched, or will watch, because we will also watch a strange clip of Jim Henson and Kermit on the short-lived Joan Rivers talk show. Can we talk? How do you think that's going to go, Sam? Any predictions?
I don't think they're gonna talk about Kermit's penis.
Well, we'll find out next time on Kermitment if Kermit's penis is mentioned at all. We need to thank our friend Tuna for making the beautiful music you hear at the beginning of this podcast. I will say, Tuna, our podcast in general has sort of ruined Rainbow Connection for me, because when they play Rainbow Connection in the documentary, all I could think of was Cassie Wilkins.
About Muppets.
All I could think of was Cassie Wilson's voice coming in and singing, "Why are there so many?" And I was like, oh no. Sorry to anyone else that we've done that to, who can no longer hear Rainbow Connection without thinking of our theme song. But don't forget, you can go to Kermitment.com for all your Kermitment needs. Don't forget to rate and review this podcast wherever that is allowed.
Not available.
Certain platforms don't have ratings.
Yeah, okay, I guess you're right.
Yeah. Arkansas, sorry, you don't get to rate podcasts.
Only the contiguous United States can rate podcasts.
Yeah. Which Arkansas isn't now.
Nah, it fell off. Remember when it fell off?
Fell into a sinkhole.
Yeah,
it's underneath the rest now. It's a whole other level.
No longer contiguous. It is floating in an ocean of lava.
There's a moat around it.
Yep.
Prove us wrong, Arkansas. If you're a listener from Arkansas.
Never met a single person from Arkansas.
Bill Clinton.
I never met Bill Clinton.
I mean, yeah, me neither. He sent me a letter saying I did good in the presidential fitness.
I didn't get a letter from him.
Well, maybe you should have done better. I think I also got a letter because once I sent them a drawing of their cat and their family in the 90s. Yep.
Hell yeah.
I drew a crayon drawing of socks, sent it to the Clintons, and I got a thank you letter back.
Was he playing saxophone?
The cat?
Yeah.
No. No saxophone, I think, in the drawing.
That would have been cute.
If you're Bill Clinton or anybody else and want to reach out to us, you can contact us at mail@kermitment.com.
That would be huge for us, Bill. Please.
I don't really know what we would talk about if we had Bill Clinton on the podcast.
He's probably met him. I mean, he's definitely met Sesame Street Muppets at the very least.
Oh, yeah. No, I think Bill Clinton and the Muppets have definitely interacted. I mean, if the Muppets have met the Queen, they've definitely met Bill Clinton.
That's a great point.
I'm looking at a picture right now of...
Here he is with Elmo.
Yep. For anyone else who's not Bill Clinton, you can follow this podcast everywhere on social media at Kermitment Pod, or you can follow me at Matthew Gatos.
And I'm Sam Schultz.
And as always, keep believing.
Keep pretending.